Three adorable indoor cats are left stranded in the forest and must find their way home. Like a classic Disney adventure, right? They'll encounter all kinds of cute critters along the way, even if there's something not quite right about them. Why are their eyes red and mouths foaming? Well, at least there are people nearby, and indoor cats know that people are always nice to animals. Plus, they'll meet some new friends along the way to help them on their journey. Nothing bad could ever happen when you have friendship, even if they get scratched and start acting funny. Well, whatever happens, I'm sure Elsie, Patch, and Lord Fuzzy Britches will be just fine. Or they would be if this was a Disney movie. But this is a far cry from Disney. This is Feral, and looks can be deceiving as it's one of the most brutal and shocking horror comics I've read recently. Hello friends, this is Grief speaking, and today I'm covering the long-requested Feral. You may find the art style familiar as it's made by the same people that brought you Stray Dogs. Similar to Stray Dogs, Feral has a cute Don Bluth style aesthetic, but is actually a dark and gritty horror story. While Stray Dogs is a slow-burning psychological thriller, Feral starts off right in the shit and never lets up. If you like this comic, be sure to support the author and artist by buying a copy at your local bookstore. But that being said, we have a lot to get to. This is Feral Explained Part 1. Starting with Chapter 1, Indoor Cats. We see a cat named Elsie cozily watching out a window on a beautiful day. She says, "This was perfect. This was every day, before everything flipped upside down." It then cuts to an animal control truck cruising down a mountain road. In the back, dozens of cats are in containers. Elsie is calling out for another cat named Lord. He's in a container below her and just tells her to stop yelling, she's embarrassing him. She scolds him, telling him he needs to answer so she knows he's okay. Just then, a disturbed looking fox stops in the middle of the road as the truck rounds a corner. In a panic, the driver swerves and the truck goes careening off the cliff, flipping in the air and landing upside down. The crash breaks the crates open and the surviving cats all flee into the woods. That's a hell of an opening. Elsie and another cat named Patch search around for Lord but can't find him. It seems Elsie, Patch, and Lord all have the same owners and live together. While looking for Lord, they start arguing. Patch criticizes Elsie for babying Lord all the time, saying he'll find his way back. And she snaps at him, saying no, he doesn't always find his way back. We see a flashback of Elsie watching out the window as her family searches the woods for Lord. We also learn that Lord is short for Lord Fluffy Britches. In the present, Elsie decides they should try to head home, at the protest of Patch, who thinks they should wait by the truck since the people will know where to go. Elsie points out that the man in the truck is dead and the driver is missing, and if you look back at the crash sequence, you'll notice the driver flying out of the windshield. Fact is, they're not going to be any help at this point. Patch continues to argue with her, believing the driver will return if they wait, and eventually their people will pick them up, like they do at the doctor. But Elsie tries to explain this isn't like the doctor. Their people didn't want to send them away, reminding him that the little girl in their family was shouting and crying when they left. As they argue, they hear a human voice nearby, coming from a walkie-talkie. They follow the sound, and it leads them to the missing driver, who's dead and hanging from a tree. The two cats freak out, and Elsie says she needs a minute. She closes her eyes and breathes, then utters the phrase, 1, 2, 3 little kittens. This seems to summon the spirit of a great cat. It really reminds me of Simba talking to Mufasa in The Lion King. The big cat points out that Lord is lost again. In another flashback, we see Lord as a kitten being introduced to Elsie for the first time. Then the cat spirit asks Elsie if he knows what she did. I'm not exactly sure what's happening here, but it seems as if she's accessing some guiding cat spirit. Either way, it makes me wonder, what doesn't Lord know? Anyway, the spirit fades, but Elsie finds herself looking at an actual animal in its place. It looks like a raccoon drinking from a nearby pond, and Elsie approaches it, glad to see that they aren't the only ones out here. When the raccoon turns its head, however, its eyes are red and its mouth is frothing. Elsie realizes it's not a cat, and it slowly makes its way toward her, snarling. It moves closer, ready to lunge at her, showing its dripping teeth. It's a scary sight. Just as it goes in for the attack, Patch tackles it, and they both go flying into the pond. Patch manages to crawl out, and the raccoon flails wildly in the water. The terrified cats wonder what the hell is wrong with this thing. It crawls out of the water and starts swiping at them. Then a fox jumps in out of nowhere and takes a bite out of the raccoon's arm. Two more foxes appear, all looking deranged and foaming at the mouth. They lay in on the raccoon, devouring the creature. Already this comic is more gruesome than Stray Dogs, and let me warn you, it does not let up from here. Elsie and Patch use this as a distraction to run away, but they don't get far before the foxes take notice. One of them has an entire raccoon arm in his mouth, by the way. We see their glowing red eyes in the background as the two cats flee for their lives. It's not much use though, these suckers are fast. The cats find a space under a tree trunk and hide, watching as the foxes move in on them, hissing and growling like zombies. It looks like this is the end for these poor house cats, when suddenly a loud snap can be heard from above. The branch that the driver's body was dangling from snapped, and his corpse falls right onto one of the foxes, crushing him beneath the weight. This scares the other two away, and the crushed fox panics as it bleeds out beneath the large man's mangled body. Absolutely brutal. Patch now seems on board with Elsie's plan of getting the hell out of here and trying to find their home. Then something else zips out of the woods right toward them and pins Elsie to the ground. It's Lord. We finally get eyes on the little bastard, and he's okay. This is a side note, but I like Lord's design, how he has this little tuft of hair on his head. It actually kind of reminds me of Sora's lion cub transformation in Kingdom Hearts 2. Maybe that's too deep a cut. Let's get back to the story. It's clear that Lord is a young and hyper cat, and he starts telling Elsie about everything that happened to him in rapid and disjointed succession. How the crash was scary and how many trees there are, the river he found up ahead, and even some deer he saw. He says him and the other cats chased some of the deer, and then the deer chased them back. Some of the cats got really angry all of a sudden and attacked the others. He mentioned some badgers and foxes as well that had something horribly wrong with them. Elsie finally interrupts his rambling and says that they need to get home. She doesn't see Patch and starts calling for him. We see him back by the truck licking his paw. It seems during the fight with the raccoon, he got a bad scratch. There's a close-up on his eyes, and they're steadily becoming red and bloodshot. He then runs ahead to join the others. This chapter ends with a definition of the term rabies, a virus generally spread through saliva of infected animals. The rabies virus is most often transmitted through a scratch or bite. Animals most likely to transmit rabies in the US include bats, coyotes, foxes, raccoons, and skunks. Symptoms include fever, headache, excess salivation, muscle spasms, paralysis, and mental confusion. It ends by saying, once symptoms appear, the disease is nearly always fatal. Yeah, so if you hadn't guessed it, there is a mass rabies outbreak in the area. If you pay attention to some of the chatter on the walkie-talkie earlier in the chapter, it seems like this is a particularly strong variant that spreads fast. It's a brilliant way to tell a zombie story involving animals in a legitimately scary idea. Now let's move into Chapter 2, The Bad Kind. Elsie, Patch, and Lord peek out from some bushes to see something horrific. Rabid wolves ripping apart a deer with sickening sound effects. Elsie points out that they're gonna need to avoid any other animals for now since something is seriously wrong. But as she speaks, Lord just casually strolls up toward the wolves for a better look. Elsie tries to stop the reckless cat and he just yells at her, "What?" Of course, this instantly alerts the wolves to their presence. Wolves are already pretty scary, but we're talking zombie wolves here. Elsie snatches up Lord and they hide in the bush while the wolves fan out and search the area. Luckily, the creatures don't find them and head off. Patch talks about how hungry he's getting, and Lord says maybe they can ask the other cats for food. He gestures to a spot nearby where a group of cats are feasting on something. Once again, Lord just waltzes out of the bushes to ask them if they can get directions, and when the cats look up, it's clear that they're infected too. A chase ensues and the largest cat is gaining on them fast. It pounces for Elsie, but before he can take a bite out of her, the wolves show back up, and one of them bites the large cat's head off. It's gruesome as hell. Elsie, Patch, and Lord turn to see it's not just the wolves, but several other animals, including the foxes and some dogs. It's a full-on zombie horde behind them. They run as fast as they can until they're pinned to a tree. Then from above, a voice shouts down, ushering them to climb up the tree. We see two more cats on a branch that don't look infected. The three cats then start to climb, out of reach from their rabid pursuers. They probably should have thought of that earlier, but these are house cats after all. We learn that the two new cats' names are Jonas and Scratches, but before Elsie can finish with introductions, Jonas interrupts her, telling her to keep moving and never stop. He says to stick to the trees since most animals can't climb other than the bad cats. Elsie tries to stop again. It seems like she's going to do her cat spirit breathing thing, but Jonas butts in, saying if you stop moving even for a moment, they will catch you. And if these indoor cats want to make it out of here, they'll need to listen to him. They keep moving toward the river up ahead, but are cut off by a rabid cat, forcing them to drop to the branches below. Jonas says they'll have to pass through the river since the bad kind hates water. Patch doesn't like the sound of this, saying how much he hates water, and Elsie says, yeah, they all hate water, but there's no way they can jump across, so this is their last option. They find the shallowest point of the river and start working their way toward the other side, except for Patches, who tests his luck by trying to jump across tree to tree. And he actually pulls it off, saying, holy shit, I made it. The branch he grabbed snaps, however, and he falls all the way to the ground, landing on 2 feet, of course. He looks up and sees the disturbing group of rabid animals all on the other side snarling at him. Jonas notices Patch licking his paw and assumes he got hurt during his fall. Elsie starts scolding him for the jump, saying she expects this kind of reckless behavior from Lord, but not from him. Then she realizes Lord isn't with them. They look up and find that he's still on the other side of the river in the tree, not knowing how to get down. Jonas tells him to just use his claws, but Lord reveals he doesn't have any. We get another flashback here of Lord as a kitten and clawing the shit out of his owner and the couch. He's then taken to the vet to get declawed. In a conversation between the father and daughter, we learn that they had to do this after Lord gave her brother stitches, and that ever since he got lost, he's just too aggressive. It's another mention of Lord being lost. I wonder what happened to him. Back in the present, Jonas asks exactly what I was thinking. If he doesn't have claws, how did he get into the trees in the first place? Lord just says, I don't know, and below, the infected cats start to climb up toward him. Jonas runs across the river once more and leaps up to save Lord, grabbing him by the scruff and dragging him to the other side of the river with the rest of the crew. Elsie tries to comfort Lord, and Jonas just says keep it moving. In frustration, she finally snaps at him, asking who he is, where they're going, and what is wrong with all the animals. Scratches apologizes for Jonas, telling her that some outdoor cats aren't very sociable. Elsie asks him where they are, and Scratch just says he doesn't really know. He's always been in these woods, only now something smells different. Lord butts in, saying that he saw their home. While he was up in the tree, he thinks he saw the mountains by their house and the tall red trees near the creek. Elsie is pretty skeptical. The truck must have taken them miles from home. Patch comes in from the woods nearby and drops a dead rabbit they could use for food. He says he found it dead, but it's still warm. Scratches then takes a look at it and says it's not safe. He can tell just by smelling it. It's like the others, the bad kind. Patch looks a little uncomfortable. His eyes are still slowly turning red. Jonas then comes up holding a squirrel he caught, and this one's actually safe to eat. Lord's a picky eater and complains that he hates squirrels. Patch starts laying into him about how he always does this, but who cares, it's more food for him. Lord snaps back, saying there's real food at home, why can't they just go there? He insists again that he saw it from the trees, and surprisingly, Scratches backs him up, saying he actually thinks he does know where it might be. There is a creek by the mountain with houses nearby. Well, that's a good sign at least, maybe they can make it home. Elsie asks if Scratches can show them the way, but before he can reply, a rabid wolf jumps into frame and tears Scratch's neck out in a flurry of blood. Oh my god. The others have no choice but to run away as the wolf chows down on Scratch's body. Okay, so this new character we were just getting used to is dead. And get used to that sort of thing. This comic is completely unforgiving. Elsie hesitates and asks Jonas if they should do something, but he just says that's exactly what happens if you stop moving. They climb to a higher branch on the tree and look out. Lord points out the mountain and creek that he mentioned, and Jonas confirms that there are houses there. Lord says that's where their people are, and if they can just find people, they'll be safe. Elsewhere in the woods, we see several men in hazmat suits holding rifles. They declare a code orange. All four-legged animals are now assumed infected and contagious and are to be eliminated on sight. Okay, well, now they have a whole other thing to be afraid of. This chapter ends with another word, hydrophobia, fear of water, and that irrational fear of water is a common side effect caused by a furious rabies infection. Chapter 3, Survival Mode. This one starts on another flashback. Lord is still a kitten and is chasing a laser pointer around the room to the entertainment of his family when it cuts back to the present and he's doing the same thing, only this laser pointer is actually the red dot sight on a high-powered rifle and several men begin shooting at him. Luckily, Lord is a quick little guy and manages to avoid the gunfire. As he hides in the bushes, we can hear the men talking. One asks if the cat was even infected, and the other says it doesn't matter. Control says to kill anything on 4 legs. Just as they close in on the bushes Lord is hiding in, the men spot something up in the trees and fire at it. It was Jonas, who hops down to save Lord once again, chastising him for straying from the group. Meanwhile, Lord is still in shock that people could be trying to kill him. His only interaction with humans has been positive up to this point. They sneak away and climb back up in the trees. Jonas says that they never seem to hit anything up here. He doesn't think they can see very well with their helmets on. They meet up with the others and Jonas says that's the last time he risks his hide for Lord. Elsie starts babying Lord again and they notice that Patch has been awfully quiet. They ask if he's okay and he just utters the words back home. Jonas says they won't make it home if they don't start following the rules. First rule, keep moving and keep quiet. Even when they're not foaming at the mouth, there are animals out here ready to eat them. Rule 2, don't stray from the group and stay away from people. 3, we don't know who's safe out here and who's bad kind, so no strangers or new friends. Lord interrupts him, pointing out that they're technically new friends. Jonas just says, trust your senses. And rule 4, trust your nose. If something smells off, leave it. 5, don't chase sparkles. If it looks exciting, run the other way. We can see an example here of shining jewelry hanging in a metal trap to lure in cats. Most important, don't try to be a hero. Other cats can take care of themselves. Elsie just needs to worry about Lord. Just then they notice that Lord is missing. Again. Worse than that, the reason he wandered off is because he saw a shimmering light and couldn't resist checking it out. He moves in on the sparkles, his eyes wide, and thank God it's not a trap. Instead, he finds the shiny collar of a cat. She seems like she's not infected and begs Lord not to hurt her. Her name is Gigi, and Lord tells her it's okay, he's a friend. Jonas and the others show up shortly after, and he starts sniffing the cat furiously, saying something smells a little off, and he's not sure if she's bad kind or not, or where she even came from. Gigi says she came from the town. Her and her partner Max lived in town with their people, but then the men came and they took Max. He tried to get loose and, well, they shot him. Gigi just ran as fast as she could until she ended up here lost in the woods. Lord comforts her and tells her she can come with them, but Jonas is pissed, wondering if he heard even a single rule. Elsie looks at the nearby stream and says the water seems clean, so they all take a break to drink. Patch, however, doesn't seem to want to go near the water, and only we know why. Elsie tries to convince him, and then out from the trees, the foxes are back. And there's more of them. 6 ravenous foxes staring them down. They need to get back into the trees, but the foxes have already cornered them. Then Lord, that ballsy SOB, actually tries to attack the foxes, jumping right at them. The thing is, he overshot the jump and just flies past them. It's actually pretty funny, him attempting this badass sacrifice only to sail over their heads. Once he lands, he just keeps on running and a few of the foxes chase after him. It's just enough of a distraction to allow the other cats to make a break for it as well. The problem is Patch is acting weird and won't move. Elsie calls for him to follow while a fox slashes at her and Gigi. We cut to Lord, who's running like hell from the zombie foxes. He finally leaps on a tree trunk and climbs to safety. At the same time, he spots the men in the hazmat suits walking by, and it seems like they've spotted the other cats up ahead. Trying to save his friends, Lord leaps from the tree, and this time he doesn't overshoot it. He lands directly on one of the men's faces, forcing him to drop his gun and scaring the hell out of the other 2. Lord hisses as they point their guns at him, and next we only hear the sound of gunshots ringing out through the forest. Meanwhile, Elsie, Gigi, and Patch are still running from the remaining foxes, but they can't hold out for long. Jonas watches from the trees as one of the foxes leaps onto Patch, pinning him to the ground, and ready to tear him to shreds. Just then, Lord pops out from the bushes. I guess he survived the gunshots. Everyone, including the foxes, turns to look at him, and he just yells out, "Run." Right behind him, the men come charging through, shooting everything in sight. Luckily, the foxes are the closest and largest animals nearby. As they get gunned down, the rest of the cats make a break for it. Afterwards, everyone seems more or less okay, other than Patch, who's still acting strange and won't respond to Elsie. He just says the word home and points ahead. Sure enough, it seems they've made it as they spot their house at the edge of the woods. However, there's yellow quarantine tape wrapped around the nearby trees and an evacuation order that demands all Creek County residents leave immediately. Any pets that weren't yet surrendered to animal control must be left behind. So who knows what these cats are going to find here. Chapter 4. Housebroken. They see that the front door is open as the cats approach their house, and Jonas starts coming up with a game plan to scope it out and make sure it's safe first. But of course, Lord just barges right in without asking anyone. Jonas says that this boy is a mess, and Patch gives Elsie a mean side eye, saying, "Yeah, well, whose fault is that?" Elsie looks hurt by the comment, and Gigi asks her what he means, but Elsie is just quiet. First things first, they need to find some food. Unfortunately, the pantry door is closed, but Patch jumps open and pulls the handle. I guess Elsie taught him how to open doors at some point. Speaking of which, Elsie has gone off upstairs alone, where she does her strange breathing ritual. 1, 2, 3 little kittens, and the cat spirit appears, telling her to rest and conserve her strength. Elsie says she has no more strength. They're home now and safe, but the spirit tells her she's still lost and that this place is no longer her home. She says soon he will learn what you did, before drifting away. Okay, something definitely happened between Elsie and Lord. Elsie then hears a human voice and panics running downstairs, but it turns out only to be the TV, or what they call the box on the wall. Lord turned it on while trying to eat the remote since the pantry turned out to be empty. Elsie tries to thank Lord for helping guide them home, but he's too distracted and they just end up arguing instead. Lord accidentally turns the volume all the way up and the other cats freak out thinking it's people as well. They enter the room and this part's great as the cats try to make sense of the TV from their perspective. Jonas in particular doesn't understand it since he's an outside cat, and when a commercial comes on for hamburgers, he thinks it's real and tries to get one. Meanwhile, Patch is being extra mean and is roasting the guy for not knowing what a wall box is. Next, a nature show comes on showing birds, and Gigi and Lord join in, believing that if they could just get closer, they could get at them. It's a funny scene, and if you go back and pay attention to the words coming from the TV in the background, there's a little more insight into the outbreak. We learn from the news that the quarantine zone is rapidly expanding as the virus spreads, and that researchers blame a highly adaptable strain of the virus. Out of nowhere, the loud sound of a dog barking echoes through the house, scaring the cats half to death. They soon realize the barks are coming from the basement, and they're a little confused considering they never had a dog. Lord just walks up to the door and says he's gonna let it out. Of course, everyone stares at him in disbelief, telling him not to open that door. Jonas then very seriously warns him not to do it. Lord says okay, fine, he won't, but slowly backs towards the door and then leaps up and opens it anyway. I've never had such a love-hate relationship with a character. We've all seen a cat with Lord's personality, and it's pretty cute, but in a survival situation like this, he's really starting to piss me off. So the door swings open and Lord just walks in to the shock of the other cats. He comes back with a fluffy dog behind him, telling everyone it's okay, it's just Petey from next door. Although something is very off, and immediately Petey goes apeshit with red eyes and yellow foam spraying from his mouth. He snarls and swipes at Lord. It doesn't seem to scratch him, but it does knock him to the ground all the same. Man, this massive dog is scarier than the wolf somehow. It moves in on Lord to take a bite, and Jonas jumps in, tackling Petey to the ground and saving Lord once again. They run and Lord says he thinks something might be wrong with Petey. Jonas is like, "Are you dim?" "Yeah, something's wrong with them." The dog is lunging at every cat nearby and they start heading upstairs. As they do, Patch starts yelling at Elsie, saying, "This is your fault, you did this." What the hell is he talking about? Petey comes roaring up from behind them and Lord jumps on his back to draw his attention. Now it's just him and Jonas downstairs to deal with Petey. As the dog closes in on Lord, he runs straight for the front door and at the last second leaps up and pulls it open, sending Petey outside. They shut the door behind them and the dog runs off into the night. Alright, well, another crisis averted it seems. The other cats come downstairs to make sure everyone's okay, and Jonas straight up slaps Lord across the face, calling him reckless and stupid. I can't say I blame him. Patch chimes in again and says it's not Lord's fault he's all screwed up. Elsie tells him to shut his mouth, but Patch continues. We get some flashback images as he talks about Lord. Lord was always high-spirited and rambunctious even when he first joined the family, something that Elsie found quite annoying since for a long time she was the only pet. After only a month or two, Elsie was fed up with him. She led Lord outside and told him they were going to play a game of hide and seek, only Elsie never tried to find him. She was just hoping he would get lost. Well, that's messed up. The family went out searching for Lord, but didn't find him, and Elsie went back to being alone and happy. Then one day the family stumbled upon Lord on the verge of death in the woods, scrawny and beaten up with his tail missing. It's a sad and horrible sight. Patch says he was quiet at first and it took a long time for his body to recover, but his mind was broken. He came back wrong after that. Poor Lord doesn't even remember any of this, and in tears, he asks Elsie if it's true. She clearly doesn't have a good excuse for what she did. She just says she's sorry and she's not good with other cats. But Lord is overcome with emotion and bolts out the front door and into the woods. Elsie asks Patch why he's been so aggressive. Why now, of all times, would he tell Lord that? He's hunched over and doesn't answer her, and then he turns around, hissing. His eyes are completely red now, and foam is pouring from his mouth and nose. It seems Patch has finally turned, and his growing hostility was due to the infection growing inside of him. At the end of this chapter, there's a sad panel of a social media post. Petey's family posts a picture of him and say he's missing. Man, he looked like such a sweet dog before too. Chapter 5. Fall. Elsie says that they had always felt safe here. We get a beautiful shot of their home as the leaves fall. Patch is slowly moving toward Elsie, looking menacing as ever after his monstrous change. Jonas jumps in, wrestling Patch to the ground and urging Elsie to grab Gigi and run. He starts clawing the hell out of Patch, and Elsie tells him to stop and not to hurt him. Jonas looks back at her like, "Are you serious?" And Patch takes the opportunity to get a leg up in the fight, smashing Jonas into the wall. Jonas tells them again to get out, and Elsie and Gigi run outside while the fight rages on. Shortly after, Jonas runs outside and manages to shut the door behind him. Gigi reminds him that Patch knows how to open doors and that's not going to stop him, but Jonas says he won't. He made sure of it. Well, that's an ominous thing to say. What did he do? Take his paw off or something? Either way, they keep moving forward, and Gigi mentions she doesn't feel very good. Elsie says they can't leave Patch. Lord ran away, and she just can't lose them both. Jonas then gives her the hard truth. Patch is one of them now. Just like the foxes, the wolves, and Petey. He isn't her friend anymore. He's bad kind. Elsie just breaks down into tears and Gigi comforts her. Even Jonas looks a little guilty for being so harsh. Elsie finally gets back up and declares that they're gonna go after Lord. Jonas tells her there's no trees the direction Lord went and it's pretty dangerous. But that's exactly why Elsie needs to go. It's dangerous and Lord is out there all alone. More tears stream down her face and Jonas uses his paw to wipe them away. It's here he first notices that he has a large scratch on his arm. It looks like Patch got him in the fight. He steps back, realizing what this means, when in a truly shocking moment, a gunshot rings out. Jonas is shot through the head right in front of Elsie, blood spraying onto her face. She stands in shock, not able to process what just happened. Gigi cries out next to her, but her words are muffled to Elsie, and Jonas's body slumps to the ground. In the distance, the group of men make their way toward them, their guns drawn. Gigi desperately tries to get Elsie to move, but she's stuck in a trance. The men open fire at them, and this seems to finally get her moving. The two cats run for it until they come upon an old barn. Inside, it looks pretty gross. The floors are all sticky with some kind of green liquid. Elsie is still partially in shock and just standing still in the barn while Gigi runs around panicking, not knowing what to do. Outside, she sees the men approach the barn, which causes her to panic even more. Some slime drips onto Elsie from the ceiling, and this finally snaps her out of it. She looks up and finds that the ceiling is full of hundreds of bats, and from the looks of them, they have rabies. I can't imagine looking up and seeing that. It would be beyond frightening. Elsie tells Gigi to keep it quiet, but the men outside are getting close and their chatter wakes the bats up. Those beady red eyes look straight out of hell. The bats go crazy, flooding out of the top of the barn and swarming the area, attacking the men outside. It's pure chaos as the bats latch onto them. Inside, the cats are caught in a bat swarm of their own, and Elsie jumps into action, helping Gigi hide under a crate crate and crawling into a pile of hay herself. Inside, she waits, hearing the horrific screeching of zombie bats all around her. Slowly, they begin to lessen. She waits a while until it's gone completely silent and then climbs back out of the hay. Thinking they've got to move quickly while the men are distracted, she rushes over to the crate. When she lifts it up, she finds Gigi along with 3 baby kittens. It seems Gigi was pregnant this whole time, which explains why Jonas smelled something off about her and why she was feeling sick. Outside, snow begins to fall, and deep in the woods we see Lord. All alone, he walks by the stream with tears in his eyes. Back at the house, the back door is open and there's a large trail of blood leading out. It looks like Patch did make it out of the house and he's in rough shape. Jonas didn't manage to take his whole arm off, but did give him a pretty nasty gash. Patch then wanders into the woods, and that's the end of the first arc of Feral. These first 5 issues do a great job of building a horrific scenario and just never letting off the gas. Of all the horror comics I've read lately, this one really kept me on the edge of my seat the whole way through. I'm excited to cover the next arc as well because it's been hard enough watching these adult cats survive, but now we've added 3 kittens to the mix. So what do you guys think of Feral so far? Let me know in the comments. I'll be covering the next 5 issues called the Cat Lady arc next week, so stay tuned for that. Shout out to Kill Me Katie as always for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now. And if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me a submission to the address below with a name or social media handle. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.
You win some, you lose some, and no one can tell you why. So you go home again. You lick your wounds and say goodbye. You know you've messed things up this time, so you go home.
Child of God is one of the most unsettling comics I've read. Is it because of the violent murder? Partly. Is it because of the showcase of human ugliness? Sure. But mostly it's because the story is the first-person account of a psychopath and killer. We look into the mind of someone who completely disassociates with the rest of humanity and feels no remorse for his destructive and sadistic actions. Trapped in a bubble of nihilism, he sees human life as meaningless, and so wants to destroy everything. Worse than that, you get the sense that the evil within this killer is almost a cosmic force, or at least he thinks so, and that in itself is scary as hell. This is a comic that is gruesome, barbaric, and depressing. The beautiful art style helps make a slight buffer from the unhinged acts of graphic violence displayed, but make no mistake, this story is not for the faint of heart. This is Child of God. Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're going to be taking a short break from Western comics and dipping our toes back into the messed up world of horror manga. Many of you may be familiar with my Disturbing Manga Iceberg series. While making that, I read some of the foulest and most depraved works of horror fiction I'd ever encountered. Some of these mangas were so revolting, I straight up blocked them out. I basically took the Men in Black Neuralizer and wiped that shit from my memory. But some of these comics, as disturbing as they were, still stick with me for one reason or another. One example is a one-shot horror comic called Child of God. With a mixture of beautiful, unique art and unsettling storytelling, this is one of those messed up comics I just had a hard time putting down. It follows the life of an unnamed serial killer and cult leader starting from birth to adulthood. If you're a fan of the novel No Longer Human or Junji Ito's manga adaptation, you'll find the autobiographical style here familiar. This is a first-hand account of a psychopath. I should note that in this manga, the central character is never actually named, which makes it so much harder to explain in a video like this. So just for the sake of ease, I'll be calling him Norman, named after the iconic psycho himself, Norman Bates. Anyway, this long of an intro always gets me a little antsy, so let's get right into the comic. This is Child of God Explained. Chapter 1, Child of a Black Sun. On the very first page, we see an infant in a toilet, and it has one of the most what the f opening lines I've ever read. This is how I was born. I was born from my mother's hole. You must allow me absolute freedom. I mean, what a way to kick things off, and honestly, this is a good insight into how messed up this manga gets. We then get some strange cosmic imagery as Norman describes coming into existence in his mother's belly and how he watched as dozens of his brothers and sisters were digested. We see him as a sperm, and he explains how he attached himself to his mother's stomach lining. He slowly begins to form into a fetus, and we see his birth into the toilet bowl. Looking up, he sees a black hole, which he calls a god of revenge. This is where his story begins. A child of blood and excrement. The child of God. He simply says, "Then I stood up and began my life." He goes into a T-pose and his shadow forms a cross on the floor as he dedicates his new life to getting revenge on the world. Yeah, so in this chapter, it's hard to separate what is literally happening from the poetic language, but the fact that he ended up in his mother's belly and mentions all his potential siblings being devoured implies that he was a product of not intercourse but oral sex. Somehow he managed to survive as sperm and grow within her belly until he was ready, and his mother shat him out. There's pretty clear symbolism in the art here that is just vague enough that I don't think I have to blur, but basically the black hole seems to be, well, his mother's hole. Whether this is what actually happened or just a mythological origin story, it's still really disturbing. Honestly, we haven't even scratched the surface on this one, so let's keep moving. Chapter 2. Childhood. On this chapter cover, we see many children carrying different small pets, except for Norman, who's holding a severed human arm. In the region Norman grew up in, there was a custom. If a baby walked before their first birthday, a large ball of sticky rice was tied to their back. That way they wouldn't leave their parents when they grew up, I guess. Norman stood up at 10 months old, and as expected, his family tied the rice to his back. However, Norman didn't fall down, and soon someone pushed him so that he fell onto his back. Everyone then looked down at him, laughing. He didn't cry though. Instead, he lay there as they stared at him, as if he was dead. We jump forward in time a bit to Norman's first trip to the barber. He's wearing a dress here and says that he was raised as a girl until the age of 2 and never had his hair cut. This is just an interesting aspect of the story that is never brought up again. Anyway, as him and his mother sat in the waiting area, Norman looked up and saw a disturbing thing. The barber's chairs had become what he describes as executioner stands. One by one, boys climbed onto the platforms and melted. This bizarre process seemed familiar to him. He looked at his mother only to find an old witch in her place. She told him that these were his brothers, and he understood her to mean that he is the only survivor out of countless children who have died. It's another strange and symbolic section, but let me warn you, the second part of this chapter jumps right into the shit. Literally. Norman says he developed the habit of playing in his feces since his parents failed to potty train him. The pungent smell induced a sort of ecstasy in him, and we can see the kid rubbing it on his face. He then mentions how sometimes he would even eat it. My God. I haven't covered anything this gross in a while. Finally, his parents were fed up. They consulted a doctor who recommended that they give Norman clay to play with as a substitute. As the doctor hoped, Norman lost his fixation with poop and became utterly obsessed with the clay. He built hundreds of clay figures until his room was filled with them. Then, one day, he smashed all of them to bits, ripping their heads and limbs off in a brutal fashion. He labels this as his first atrocity, and we can see from his perspective that he imagines the clay figures to be real. Human figures cover the floor around him with their bodies torn apart. Shortly after this, Norman's pet cat was killed, and we can see its head sat in a puddle of blood, as well as its body nearby with its guts torn out. If you're uncomfortable with this kind of gore, it only gets worse. Norman says he loved the cat, and it loved him, but we can see him brandishing an axe, implying he was the one who gutted it, as if we didn't already guess that. After this, Norman cried all day long, and the adults tried to comfort him, never suspecting him as the killer. It's interesting to me that he doesn't call them his parents, but just adults. So you could already see his level of emotional detachment. Norman then sat crying until he himself no longer believed he killed the cat. Once this happened, he suddenly stopped crying. This was the year before he started elementary school, which leads us to Chapter 3. First Love. Norman starts elementary school, and his parents put him in a class for the emotionally disturbed, as well as those with personality disorders and mental disabilities. I guess they could sense something was wrong with this kid. Norman says this was a waste of time because he had already rejected things such as emotions and personality as unnecessary to his life. Every week he went to the group and had no idea how to interact with the other kids. They drooled, and some of them picked their noses and ate their snot. So Norman did everything he could to avoid touching them. Because of this, he was labeled uncooperative talkative, and it was taken as a possible sign of autism. Not wanting to be sent to a hospital or institution, he tried to build good relationships with the adults, taking part in their stupid games. Here we can see Norman playing a traditional Japanese children's game called Hige-Jisan, meaning old bearded man. He plays the game perfectly, trying to fit in and seem normal, but clearly he takes no joy from it and finds it ridiculous. Norman found only one thing bearable amongst the miserable hours that he spent there. One of the volunteer teachers, a college student. She noticed that Norman didn't like playing with the other kids, and so out of kindness, she played with him. They would sometimes cuddle, and while he didn't understand fun, he thinks he must have been experiencing something like pleasure. When he uses the word fun here, I think he means like arousal. Later in the story, the word fun comes up several times, and it clearly seems to be a sexual thing, and it's just so chilling the way he describes this stuff. It was only because of this teacher and to please his parents that Norman endured the humiliation of participating in this class. One day while watching the other children, Norman realized that his favorite teacher wasn't there. He searched the surrounding area for her, eventually wandering into the woods. Here he found a small cabin and heard screaming coming from inside. He peeked through the window to see something absolutely horrific. Though at the time, Norman had no idea what he was witnessing. We see the college girl is being assaulted by a masked man. It seems he had kidnapped and brought her here. It is a brutal scene, as in the process, the masked man is choking her to death. After the man finishes, it's clear the girl is dead and he leaves her corpse behind. Norman watches all of this through the window and enters the cabin after the man leaves. He stands over the girl's naked body and just stares at her, commenting on her swollen face. Instead of screaming in terror or crying, this twisted ass kid blushes, and in one of the most up comic panels I've seen recently, he moves in on the corpse, describing this as his first sexual experience. Oh my god. He goes even further by saying that this influenced all of his later sexual encounters. And it only gets worse from here, guys. Chapter 4. Prey. Norman has now entered middle school, and his parents were pleased that their child, who was once considered mentally disturbed, was now doing great in school. However, Norman thought of this school as a prison, and in a great sequence, the kids shift into apes and pigs. This is the way he sees them. It kind of reminds me of No Longer Human, when Oba sees others as insects. Norman determined that this place had absolutely nothing to do with him, though there are certain skills needed to navigate society, like learning not to stand out. But it's not enough just to sit quietly. That can be just as noticeable. The trick is to be average. To be averagely cheerful, smart, stupid, and obedient. And Norman learned to wear a faint, cowardly smile on his face, honing these skills in order to distance himself from society. It was all so meaningless to him. The children here were not very picky about their prey. Any small perceived difference was enough to attract attention, and Norman's class chose a lone girl to torment. We then see an example of this horrible bullying. I mean, really, this is beyond bullying. It's assault. But some kids pin the poor girl down on her desk and grab her hand. One of the bullies holds up a needle, saying, if you make a sound, you'll get another one, and if you cry, that's another on top of that. Then, in a sequence that is honestly hard to look at, the bully sticks the needle into the girl's finger right under her nail. Of course, the girl cries out in pain, and so they stick a needle into another finger. It makes my hands tingle just to think about it. The students then tell the girl to say thank you, and she does. She thanks them for this torture. Jesus Christ, I thought Norman was bad, but these kids are sadistic too. And it's all for no particular reason, just that the girl was a little different. And don't worry, it just keeps getting worse. One day in class, some of the students pass around a video camera. On it was a video of the girl being dragged into the bathroom. The other girls surrounded her and made her defecate. Then they forced her to eat her own excrement. I told you it got worse. And by the way, for such a short comic, this is the second time we've seen coprophagia. Although in this case, it's not a medical disorder, but just straight up coercion. So the kids all passed around this video and laughed. Okay, I actually side with Norman on this one. These kids are monkeys and pigs. He makes the point that these children would one day become adults. They would be considered good citizens. That day, Norman stayed after school to help a teacher with something, and when he returned to the classroom, he found the bullied girl still sitting at her desk, staring off into space. As he got closer, he realized she had wet herself, and her fear was so great that no expression could convey it. Instead, her face was blank, and she sat in a sort of shock. Watching her, Norman found she piqued his curiosity. Just as the rest of the class saw her as prey, he too saw her as a sort of prey. He approaches her and asks if he could help her. She just stares at him, and he then asks, "Shall I kill them for you?" Which leads into our next chapter, Chapter 5, The First Murder. Well, it gets right to it. The very first image in this chapter is the most shocking so far. One of the students' naked corpse belly down in the dirt. Her head and hands are cut off and placed upright. Most disturbing is a bouquet of flowers that seem to be shoved up her tail end. This is like a Hannibal Lecter level presentation. Norman purposely situated the body in the open area behind the gym so that the students would find it before the teachers. They formed a circle around it and stared silently in shock as if performing a strange ritual. Eventually, the teachers came out and called the police, then sent the children home, aside from the first few who found the body. We can see Norman and the bullied girl lock eyes. It seems this was one of the girl's bullies, and she must heavily suspect that this was Norman's doing. The school was then closed down for a while, and the story was all over the news, though Norman pretended to be indifferent. Well, more accurately, he really was indifferent. Once again, we are hit with a sudden and jarring image as the next page showcases the second murder. This time, the body was found in a nearby park the day that the school started back up. It's easily the most graphic image so far. The girl's stomach is cut open and her entrails are pulled out, strangling her. Her intestines, which she's hanging by, are wrapped around her neck and shoved into her mouth as well. Once again, it's an almost artistic display with the body being placed intentionally. After this incident, cameras were put up in the schools, though Norman calls it a pathetic attempt by the adults. And then we see the third crime. This time, a student is shoved into a toilet in the bathroom. A broom handle is placed under their knees and their legs are tied shut. Once again, their stomach is cut open and it seems like there's some object shoved inside. The media had made up its mind. This was the work of a perverted serial killer. The reports were quite detailed, but Norman seems almost pissed off that the news had neglected to mention how the victim's was violated, as if he's not getting all the credit he deserved. The crimes were not discussed in front of the children. Norman says that children were always viewed as victims and that this was part of his plan. He began to feel omnipotent, but at the same time wrapped in a bubble of vague nihilism. One day while out for a walk, Norman encountered the bullied girl walking her dog. They hadn't spoken since that day in the classroom. She approaches him and asks him to stop, saying that the last victim wasn't involved in the bullying. Norman simply replies that they were all involved as far as he's concerned. The girl suggests that he'll eventually get caught, but Norman believes this won't happen since he has no connection to the victims. The girl then asks, "What if I tell?" But Norman doesn't believe that she would. She looks at him and says, "You're right." And then she grins and practically skips away. The first time he had ever seen the girl smile. Then, in a jarring page turn to the next panel, we see the girl hanging from a tree by the dog's leash and a bucket kicked over below her. Although on its face it looks like the girl did this to herself, it's also a possibility that Norman forced her to do it. Either way, it's a sad end to this girl's sad life. Chapter 6. Boys. We have another time jump here to when Norman was 14 and had made something like a clubhouse in an abandoned factory outside of town. Here he would meet with 12 younger boys who were all drawn to him like a cult leader. At this point, no one spoke about the incidents from a few years back, as if the whole town was determined to forget it ever happened. Norman believed these boys, even though they had no way of knowing, could sense something in him. Something children are instinctively fascinated with: death. Although Norman was now going through puberty, he had no interest in girls and in fact found them to be disgusting. After school, he watched the boys play for hours in the clubhouse. Often it was a game of cowboys and Indians. He would separate them into two groups and make them pretend to kill each other, and he would play the leader of the cowboys. Norman says they made the games historically accurate and the Indians would always be slaughtered. They would run around naked and the cowboys would scalp them. We see this all playing out in the imagination of the kids as if it's real, including the barbaric scalpings. At the end of these games, Norman sat with a pile of scalps at his feet. In reality, these were just wigs, but it served as a substitute for the murderous impulse that had grown within him since his last killing. One day they brought a new kid to Norman, saying they found him by a train station hungry. Norman describes the boy as dirty and beautiful. Apparently he ran away and his parents didn't even care. Norman asks him if he's hungry and throws him a bread roll which the boy gobbles up. He stares at the kid all creepy and asks if his parents abandoned him. There's an eerie image here of the frame behind Norman taking on the pattern of the black sun. Chapter 7, Holy Communion. I warn you now, this is probably the most up chapter in this whole manga, which is saying something. Norman looks down on the child as he eats the bread like a looming figure of death. He says, to be honest, he fully understood what he was to the boy at that moment. He completely lost the will to resist. Norman pulls out a knife and says, "That's right, accept me, good boy. I will be the one to decide." He slices the boy's cheek and then moves in and starts licking the blood out. Ugh, it's so creepy. He then uses the knife to cut the back of the boy's shirt and shorts off, and, well, you can imagine what happens next. It's one of the most most uncomfortable things I've seen in any manga. You can just see the tears welling up in the boy's eyes and Norman's cheeks turn red. This goes on for a moment while the other boys watch, and finally, after the act is finished, Norman pulls the knife up again and repeatedly stabs the boy in the back while blood sprays onto his face. As fucked up as this manga is, the art is so unique and striking. The boy bleeding out on the floor as Norman looks at him, his face covered in blood. It's just visually very cool. So Norman just stands there staring at the blood pools around his feet, and the other kids keep watching silently. He describes this as a religious ceremony and proceeds to do a bizarre and terrifying ritual. He cuts off small chunks from the dead kid's defiled backside and throws them on the ground in front of the other boys. He then instructs them to eat the flesh and calls it bread. With tears running down their faces, the children eat the boy's flesh, and in the process, something new is born. Later, they chop the body up and hid it in the woods. Norman watched as they all dug holes in the ground and buried the body parts. It was then that something crystallized in Norman like an awakening. He became aware of his influence and desired to make use of it. Chapter 8, The Path to Freedom. More time passes and Norman is a little older, at this point looking more like an adult. He makes a creepy comment about how the boys in his cult had all grown up as well, and were at their most beautiful. The group was no longer satisfied by simply pretending to murder in their games. At first, they began attacking vagrants, and we see the boys using weapons to beat a man to death in the dead of night. Norman notes the way the boy's eyes glittered with bloodlust in the darkness. Great, he's fully formed his own personal troupe of psychopaths. The group continued to kill homeless people, carefully varying the time, location, and method as not to connect the murders. But it was too easy. The police hardly pursued the cases and chalked it up to infighting between vagrants. Society didn't seem to care either. The same people who years before made a fuss over a handful of dead kids couldn't care less if every last outcast was murdered. This aspect of society disgusted Norman. Next, they began attacking random passerby out in the open and surprisingly pulled it off. Norman describes how they would do it. Find someone walking alone, preferably an ordinary salaryman or housewife, stab them right through the heart so there's no struggle, and leave the knife in place. Then walk away as if nothing happened. And that's it. Easy. It would often take over an hour before anyone even noticed the body. Most people didn't want anything to do with someone collapsed in the street. This person was nothing but an annoyance and a spectacle. While most of the murders in this comic are gory and revolting, these more subtle murders are still really scary because it makes you think maybe someone could pull this off in real life. Imagine you're walking in a crowd and get stabbed through the heart, not even being able to process what happened, and how long would it take for anyone to notice? Well, not a single one of the boys was caught doing this, and the police were powerless in the face of these unmotivated and unrelated murders. They were satisfied with these thrilling games, but Norman felt something was missing, and he knew exactly what it was: freedom and clarity. There's a creepy image here of Norman sitting in his chair as if it's a throne. He decided to kill his parents next. Not because he had anything against them, but because he needed absolute freedom. So he ordered the boys to do it. He wasn't hesitant in killing them himself, but there needed to be no connection, a rule that he took seriously. Next, we see Norman's parents sitting around the dinner table when the boys break through the window and begin to attack them, all the while singing happy birthday for some reason. Sometimes this comic reminds me of Clockwork Orange as well. It's a creepy scene of them singing and tormenting the couple, strangling the father and stabbing the mother. As they finish the song, they smash the mother's face into a cake she'd made, and they all stand there staring at the lifeless bodies. Next, the house is burning down. Norman and the cult watch the flames, and for some reason tears run down his cheeks. Then he saw it in the flames, the writhing throng of his future. Within the fire, there are hundreds of boys looking back at him, implying he wants to expand his cult. The fire was eventually put out, and Norman reveals it was his 17th birthday. This means that the cake the mother made was likely for Norman, which makes the whole happy birthday thing even more sick. Chapter 9, The Stumbling Stone. We see Norman in bed with, I'm assuming, one of the boys, but because of the androgynous art style, I'm not really sure. He says that his parents left him a large inheritance that was more than enough to live off of as he grew up. So he never had to work and was thankful to his parents. The person in bed asks him what's the matter, and he just says, "Oh, I was just hoping humanity would be wiped out soon." It's scary that this is a casual thought for him. One day, one of the guys in his group says that he wants to leave, something that truly surprises Norman. He says that he's leaving leaving for a girl that he likes. Norman is shocked and asks him if he really finds women fun. The kid just nods, and surprisingly, Norman gives him his blessing, telling him to go, and if he ever wants to come back, he'll be received with open arms. The kid practically runs away, and the others ask Norman if he's sure. He confirms that they do not chase those who wish to leave, and that recurring black sky pattern appears behind Norman's eyes and the members of the cult. It seems this is implying that Norman is not happy about the kid leaving, and something sinister is building up within him. Next, we see the kid who left the group on a day out with the girl he loves. They seem to be getting on really well. Later on a dark night, the boy has put together a bouquet for the girl who's waiting for him at a park bench. We can see that familiar black sun pattern filling the shadows around them. The girl sits on a bench under a street lamp waiting for him, and in the darkness, we see some figures looming. They approach the girl, who is obviously frightened. Of course, it's members of Norman's cult. They surround her and then pin her down, beating her up and choking her on the pavement. The boyfriend shows up as the rest of the cult scatters off into the night. He drops the flowers at the horrific sight. His lady is naked, dead, and sprawled across the park bench, her eyes bloodshot from being choked. It's kind of heartbreaking, this guy standing here staring blankly at her corpse. Although, at the same time, we have to remember that this kid was part of the cult too, and likely killed several innocent people himself. I don't know, man, this comic just doesn't let up. It's so dark from start to finish. Chapter 10. Judas. As the guy carries the girl he loved deep into the woods, we hear Norman's monologue. He says he was a fool. He broke his only rule, that murder should have no reason, goal, or connection, though he knows what it was that made him do it. Since the world began, there was one emotion that stayed constant for him: fear. It's clear that Norman hates the fact that he allowed emotion to rule over him, and thinks that acting in this way is too much in line with the world that he despises so much. It's also interesting to note that Norman doesn't say since he began or since he was born, he says since the world began, implying that the whole universe came into existence with him. The kid lays the girl's body down and pulls out a knife. At first, it looks like he's going to chop up her body and bury her, but instead he seems to have gone back to his old ways. We see what he's done to his girlfriend's body, and it is reminiscent of Norman's early murders. He's left a handful of cuts on her chest, but more unsettling, he cut off one of her breasts and shoved the bouquet of flowers he'd brought into her downstairs. It's absolutely disgusting. Norman says that the boy did return to him after this, but for revenge. We see him kneeling and asking for forgiveness over and over again, until finally Norman goes over, kneeling beside the boy to comfort him. As he does this, the kid pulls out a knife and stabs Norman in the leg. And into the final chapter, Chapter 11, Judgment. Norman is left bleeding on the floor, and the other kids in the cult all stare at him wide-eyed. It's as if they now see Norman's attacker as the new cult leader and quickly group around him, all asking what they should do next. After a short discussion, they decide to kill Norman. The new leader says that they need to give him the death he deserves. There's no hesitation from the group, and they only ask what this death should be. The new leader responds, "Let's feed him to the pigs." So they all pile into a truck and drive out to the countryside. Norman lay on a slab of wood, still bleeding profusely from the stab wound. The monsters he helped create stare at him blankly with no emotion behind their eyes. They bring his body to the pig pen at the farm and throw him into it. Quickly, the pigs surround him and start tearing him apart and eating his body. There's some beautiful art here as the pigs are all closing in. It's ironic that Norman saw the children in his school as nothing more than pigs, and now he's meeting his end by the same creatures he compared them to. In the end, we only see some blood and a section of Norman's head lying on the ground. He says, "Humanity should probably rejoice that my life ended like this, but you mustn't get careless. I will always be reborn again somewhere." And that is the end to Child of God. It really is a dark and morbid story from start to finish. There's obviously a ton of symbolic imagery in this manga throughout, and there are so many sequences that could be pondered on. I mentioned the recurring image of the black sun, a starry black pattern that shows up during Norman's violent acts, tying him to his belief that he is actually a cosmic-like entity born from a black star. Like I said, there's a lot you could unpack in this one, but I want to know what you guys think. Is it just a senseless excuse to display evil? Is it a work of art? And are there any deeper themes to explore here? I have to admit that no matter what Child of God is trying to be, I found it captivating either way. I should note that if you like the art style, this manga was made by a brother-sister duo who have actually produced a lot of really strange material over the years, and it's often just as disturbing as Child of God. If you guys want to see me cover more disturbing manga, let me know. I have a lot of comics like this that would be fun to run through. I know some of you are probably wondering where Feral Part 3 is. Well, don't worry, I will get back to it soon, but just felt like doing something a little different this week. Shout out to Kill Me Katie as always for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now. And if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me a submission to the address below with a name or social media handle. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.
I know that it haunts you, a better person. Know that we still love you, you're only human.
Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're continuing our journey through Stagtown. As you've noticed, this is a big video. That's because we're wrapping up the rest of the entire series. I have to say, some of the coolest, creepiest, and downright disturbing parts of Stagtown in my opinion actually happen in the latter half of the series, so buckle up as we unravel the mystery of Stagtown and put an end to this nightmare. If you happen to miss my first two videos on Stagtown, you can click the link to go there first, and I'll make a playlist to keep everything in order. As I said, we have a ton to cover here, so let's not waste any more time and get right into it. This is Stagtown Explained, Part 3. Chapter 11. Long Haul. It's now wintertime. Weeks have gone by since Felix and Frankie escaped the mines with Jeremy. After Felix's apartment caved in from the sinkhole, the only place to go back to is Frankie's apartment, which is a bit cramped. Jeremy is in terrible condition, but they don't want to bring him to a doctor since they can't really trust anyone in town. It's clear that the entity under Stagtown now controls most of the residents after entering the water supply, so they have to take care of Jeremy to the best of their ability alone. At this point, he can't even speak and only screams out in terror. At the same time, he's become violently sick, constantly puking up the black liquid, and his hair's falling out. The stress of the situation and the looming feeling that something could attack them at any time has gotten tensions very high. Felix and Frankie can't stop arguing, and on top of all of that, they're almost out of money. One day, while feeding him some soup, Jeremy manages to speak for the first time, thanking them for everything. Hearing him speak brings Felix and Frankie to tears. At least it seems like Jeremy's gonna be okay. After a few more days, he finally has the strength to fully talk and move around. Felix even gives him a haircut. Man, this guy's got a lot of hobbies. With Jeremy back in better shape, they get a chance to discuss everything that's happened. Frankie starts by asking him about the fact that he was seemingly burned alive. Well, it turns out that this was all an illusion. We already know that the Stagtown entity has the ability to make people hallucinate, but I guess it has multiple ways of doing this. Originally, we saw from Frankie's perspective as Jeremy fought the camera before catching fire and jumping into the river. In reality, a second camera appeared that flashed a bright light. Jeremy knows better and covers his eyes, but Frankie and the other men look into it, manipulating their perception. Kind of reminds me of the neuralizer in Men in Black. What actually happened is Jeremy was grabbed by the camera and pulled into the river, eventually leading him underground. Although his experience there was so awful that he refuses to speak of it. After learning this, Frankie is stricken with guilt, believing that what happened to Jeremy was her fault and that she should have known better. The next day, they discuss some more and we finally learn about Nova. At the end of the last season, Jeremy mentioned finding a box in the library labeled Nova. This person was clearly digging into the mystery of Stagtown. Jeremy says that he isn't sure who Nova is other than they were a resident of Stagtown back in the 70s and into the 2000s, and that he believes that they created the symbol that combats the effects of the entity. Judging from Nova's research notes, they were trapped in the town as well, and they mentioned that the Stagtown entity is really old and doesn't understand technology, but has the ability to learn over time. Jeremy believes that Nova accidentally taught it how cameras work from filming all over town for their research, and that he may have helped it learn about computers by keeping his blog. He found that it has a harder time with numbers, however, which is why he started using numerical codes. As they discuss what to do next, Jeremy opens up his notebook and finds the place where he drew little love doodles about Frankie. He instantly turns red, realizing she must have seen it at some point. Felix catches on to what's happening and almost makes fun of him about it, but Frankie stomps on his foot and changes the subject, clearly trying not to embarrass the guy. They leave Jeremy to get some rest, and he tells Frankie that none of this was her fault before she goes. He considers telling her everything that happened before the memory reset, how they were actually really close, but ultimately he decides it could be harmful to her mind and that he's just gonna have to start over with her. We get a look at the grass outside of the building, and something is coming out of the ground. A pale white hand reaches up from under the soil. Several more days have passed, and Jeremy is almost back to his old self. He comes out of the room to thank them again for everything they've done. After overhearing a few of Felix and Frankie's arguments, he realized that they were tight on money. Pulling out the black box that he kept his research in, he reveals a secret compartment that's full of cash and a bank card. I guess Jeremy's family was loaded and left him a huge inheritance, so they won't have to worry about money, at least for a little while. Felix offers to head out and grab some much needed groceries along with some new clothes for Jeremy. He takes a picture of a silly shirt he bought and sends it to Frankie, who tells him to put it back. It's a funny little text exchange, but more importantly, if you look behind the phone, you'll notice some bare feet slowly walking towards Felix. Veins are popping out and black liquid drips down from its legs as they stop right in front of Felix, who finally puts the phone down. It's a really cool sequence, honestly, and is freaky as all hell. Just seeing the pair of legs standing there covered in black filth. The screen goes black and there's a series of strange symbols. Felix seems to be actively trying to ignore the feet, and it doesn't seem like this is the first time he's encountered them. More symbols rise up like they're appearing directly in Felix's mind, and finally he opens his eyes to find that the creature has vanished. Chapter 12. Digging. With Jeremy's money at their disposal, the gang upgrades to another apartment in the same building with more rooms to give each other a little space. They come up with the idea of getting some security equipment set up around the apartment in case anything tries to attack them. The problem is they have to do this within a closed system since they know that the entity has control of the internet. Jeremy then reveals he actually has some equipment they could use in his storage unit, and he's not talking about the stuff Frankie already looked through. He has some off-grid place that he's been storing things on the outskirts of town. He also has some more documents and research materials there as well that could be helpful. So the gang bundles up and heads out to go see it. Even little friend the cat comes along. Seems unnecessary to bring everyone, but Felix insists. He doesn't want anyone going anywhere alone. Well, after that creepy pair of feet he saw, I don't blame him. Still, he doesn't tell them about what happened because he doesn't want to worry them. They drive down a back road until suddenly a man with a gun stops their car and tells them to get out. Well, that escalated very quickly. Turns out that Jeremy knows the guy. In fact, his name is Bobby, and it's his place that Jeremy is storing his things. This guy is a bit of a conspiracy nut as well, but to an extreme degree. He isn't controlled by the entity because he already mistrusted the water supply anyway. Jeremy sorts through his things, but it looks like he's collected a lot over the years, including a huge plastic horse skeleton. Frankie finds some loose rocks about the place, and I guess Jeremy thought they may have evidence of the Bigelope on them. Felix tries to discreetly warn Frankie not to entertain Jeremy on the subject of the Bigelope, but she ignores him. Jeremy is visibly excited to talk about it with Frankie, and you know what? She's smiling as he goes through his Bigelope spiel. In this panel, she reminds me of the old Frankie before all the memory resets. Felix tells him it's all BS, but Jeremy reminds him that the Stagtown entity turned out to be real, and Frankie backs him up. They've experienced enough supernatural things that the Bigelope cryptid isn't out of the realm of possibilities. Jeremy is clearly ecstatic at her support. Felix just changes the subject and asks if Jeremy ever stayed the night in here since there's a sleeping bag, pillow, and some food in the corner. The thing is, Jeremy says he never stayed here, which means someone else has. A pretty creepy thought. They make the decision to leave as quickly as possible, and as they drive off, we get a look at the back of the garage where red handprints cover the wall. They set up the equipment as soon as they're back at Frankie's apartment. She's a little uneasy about security cameras considering what happened at the start of this series, but Jeremy assures her that it can't be hacked. This is a completely closed system. Frankie tells Jeremy about the iron mine they found underground, but they have no idea how this connects to the entity or the carousel. It's another lead at least, and they decide to go to the library to look through some records. Since Jeremy is supposed to be dead, they need to hide his appearance, and Felix has just the thing. It's a weird emo cat outfit. I don't know, it's hard to explain. I guess Felix went through a bit of a phase and still kept it around. So after laughing their asses off about it, they head out. At the library, Frankie and Jeremy look through some old documents, and Felix goes to grab a book where he is suddenly struck with with a skull-splitting headache. Looking through the shelves, he sees the pale feet standing on the other side, dripping all over the floor. They suddenly turn toward him and he freaks out. He runs over to the other two and demands they leave right now, urging them to just take everything with them. Back at the apartment, Frankie and Felix get into it about what's going on. She insists he tell them what's up, but he just denies everything. They start looking through the files, including the original box of stuff labeled Nova. Frankie looks under the label and sees the box as a stamp saying for staff use only. This implies that whoever Nova is, they might have worked at the library. Frankie also pulls out a shoebox with some things she collected over the past few months, including some marbles which Jeremy instantly recognizes as being from the Marvell house. If you remember way back to chapter 2, Miss Davids was doing some patchwork on the house, mentioning that she used to have a young man who did these sorts of things. Well, it turns out that that young man was Jeremy. He started doing odd jobs for the lady when he got the sense that something was going on there. Apparently when Jeremy worked there, the children didn't wear those freaky ass animal masks, but instead just regular surgical masks. He did notice that they played with marbles constantly. Frankie recalls Miss Davids saying they sold the marbles at craft fairs and such outside of town. If that's true, then that means it is possible for at least some people to leave Stagtown. And thinking about it, this must be the case, otherwise how would the stores get shipments of food? So how does the entity decide who goes in and out? Just then Jeremy's computer beeps, a motion alert to the camera just outside the apartment door. They take a look and it seems like it was a false alarm, but Felix spots something in the corner of the monitor. The pale feet are just barely in frame. His headache rushes back and he starts to see some of the symbols in his mind again. Grabbing his bat, he heads out into the hallway, but he doesn't find anything and starts feeling like he's losing his mind. After this incident, Felix is obsessed with patrolling the apartment complex. Inside, Frankie and Jeremy spend days going over all the documents, and it also gives them a chance to talk. They both tell each other everything they've been through, although Jeremy still has trouble talking about his time in the underground. He's also really glad Frankie recovered his keychain while she was trapped in the tunnel and clearly seems to cherish it. It's kind of sad that Frankie has no idea the reason he likes it so much is because she gave it to him before her memory was wiped. They don't want to talk about Felix behind his back, but he's been acting so strange lately, and they're getting worried about him. There's a hint of jealousy here coming from Jeremy when he sees how concerned Frankie is. You can tell he's a little worried she might have a thing for Felix. They get back to business, however, and Jeremy asks Frankie if she ever got to look at the email he sent Felix before he went missing, and if she knows about Project Ark. Outside, Felix sits on a bench when he starts to hear a strange noise. He looks over to see black footprints appearing down the sidewalk, and they're headed in his direction along with the tapping of bare feet on the pavement. It's as if an invisible creature is walking right at him. It stops for a moment and then it runs at him fast. It's really terrifying. Felix runs like hell, and as he climbs the apartment stairs, he looks back to see the footsteps not far behind. All the while, the symbols are running through his mind, only now we can see some of it in English. It says, "You can't hide anymore." We can see the footsteps climbing the stairs, as well as some handprints, as if this thing is crawling. Felix desperately enters the apartment and slams the door. Outside, we can see a handprint on the other side, and looking down, there are now several sets of footprints and handprints all over the wall. Then one last set of symbols appear saying, "We're already inside." Next, we move into another Remember segment. This one is in the form of a letter from someone named Charles Harris, a Stagtown resident in the 1800s. He writes to his friend Samuel shortly after moving to Stagtown. He tells him that the townspeople are kind and that there's an abundance of wild deer. He ends the letter by stating that he plans to build a carousel in a field behind his house after seeing one in France. Interesting. Chapter 13. Ark. We learn a little bit more about Project Ark from Jeremy. Before everything went nutso, Jeremy took all the info from Nova and sent it out to skilled theorists who read his blog. This was in the hope that they could decipher any hidden messages and send the results back. So there's a chance they could have emailed him back, but in order to check, they would need an internet connection. It's extremely risky, but they'll have to break into the library and use the free Wi-Fi to try and access Jeremy's email before the entity catches on to what they're doing. As Frankie and Jeremy discuss this, Felix comes barging into the apartment, ignoring them and slamming the bathroom door behind him. He's clearly frustrated and freaked out, and we can see a small hole in the back of his neck where the metal creature injected him with the black liquid. It looks like it hasn't completely healed up, and in fact, right now there are dark veins branching out from it. Jeremy tries to talk to him, but Felix pushes him out and locks the door. That night, while Frankie is sleeping, Felix enters her room with his baseball bat. It's an ominous sight. He grips his bat, and little friends and starts hissing at him. Then he seems to snap out of it and head back into the hall. His eyes look dilated, the same as the townspeople when they're being controlled. The next day, they discuss the library plan, and unsurprisingly, Felix is not on board. But they do eventually convince him. They actually leave out the part about the email. They're just not really sure they can fully trust him with the way he's been acting. They get to the library in the dead of night, and Frankie starts using her lockpicking skills to get the back door open. Watching this, Jeremy has a flashback to before the memory wipes when Frankie did the same thing in order to explore an abandoned building with him. In this memory, she even refers to him as Jojo. Well, if she had a cute nickname for him, then I guess they really were close. They get inside and beeline it for the computer. Felix asks Jeremy what he's doing, and he just says computer stuff, but before he can get anywhere, the power to the entire building shuts off. It looks like the entity caught on to them quicker than they hoped for, and nearby they hear a large crash. Something is in here with them. Nearby, the sound of bare footsteps patter through the aisles of books. Felix just grabs the others and starts pulling them toward a shelf to hide behind. Through the front door, a strange black mist appears and several handprints materialize on the window. At the same time, Felix starts getting a horrible headache. They head into the back offices in search of escape and luckily find a window. Jeremy also finds a laptop nearby that still has power. Not wanting to miss the opportunity to get the email, Jeremy opens it up, but down the hall, the entity is closing in on them. The black mist and handprints are filling every surface. Jeremy finds an unsecure Wi-Fi network from a nearby building and races to get the email. Behind them, the door creaks open and we can see a couple of pale toes on the other side. The door opens wide and the mist creeps in. Two pale arms are crawling toward them as well, and symbols flash on the screen, sending Felix into a full-blown panic. He looks up and we see the creature in its disturbing entirety. In the middle of the mist, a pale and white-eyed face howls, and several disembodied arms reach out from the mist around it. It's easily one of the creepiest images in the series so far. Frankie tries to talk to Felix, but he just tells them to hide and picks up a stool, swinging it wildly at the floating monstrosity, only to knock over the nearby desk and subsequently Jeremy and the laptop. Frankie tries to stop Felix, but he's only more terrified and belligerent, breaking the stool on the wall. Jeremy grabs the laptop once more, and Frankie finally yells at the top of her lungs to Felix, telling him that there's nothing here. He's fighting nothing. Looking back at his perspective, we can see the pale arms flailing in front of him, but I guess this is all in his head. He stops for a second, and then the pale legs appear again, walking toward him, and the back of his neck flares up again, the purple veins branching out even further. Frankie notices this for the first time. She tries to ask him about it, and then suddenly Felix turns around and grabs her by the throat. His eyes are black, and the mysterious liquid is dripping from his eyes and nose as he chokes Frankie. She tries to call for Jeremy's help, but she can't get the words out, and Jeremy's fixated on getting the email, assuming that Felix is protecting her. Jeremy looks over and sees the pale feet standing right beside him. Okay, so maybe not all of this was part of Felix's hallucination. This is actually the most we've seen of the legs, and above the kneecap, they become severely disfigured. It almost looks like bone or fungus or something jutting out from the top. I can only imagine what the rest of this body looks like. Well, Jeremy finds a number 2 pencil nearby that fell off the desk and stabs the thing in the calf with it. It lets out a horrific scream and falls to the floor. As the leg twitches on the ground, Felix suddenly comes back to his senses and drops Frankie to the floor where she gasps for air. Felix looks over at the creature and grabs a piece of the broken stool, then proceeds to repeatedly smash the legs. We can see the black liquid splatter across the walls and books. Finally, we get a slightly better look at the thing as Felix continues to beat the shit out of it. We don't get the full picture here, but it looks like this entity was more than just legs. However, it's hard to describe because it's so disfigured, especially after Felix wrecks it. Jeremy finally gets into his email and asks Frankie to help him memorize it, but the internet shuts off halfway through. So in the end, they only got a few details. Felix continues to smash the creature into bits until finally it disappears entirely. He collapses in tears and admits that something really is wrong with him. He feels sick. Back at the apartment, it's a little awkward. Frankie is holding a bag of ice to her bruised neck, and Felix is apologizing profusely, but she doesn't hold it against him. Instead, she says that they need to stop blaming themselves when it's the entity that's doing all of this. They discuss the mark on Felix's neck and theorize that the fluid is still in him and can control him to a limited degree. Worst of all, it seems it's growing stronger every day. They don't know what to do about it, and Frankie mentions that the only thing that this black stuff seems to be afraid of of is fire. At the sound of this, Felix suddenly jumps to his feet and runs to the kitchen, where he grabs a piece of paper and some matches. He then rushes into the bathroom and locks the door behind him. He lights the paper on fire and presses it against the back of his neck, burning himself in the process. Immediately, the black liquid pours from his eyes and mouth, and he starts vomiting into the sink. As he does this, Frankie picks the lock on the bathroom door, and they find him collapsed on the ground. It was a crazy act on Felix's part, but it does seem that he forced it out of his body. Chapter 14. Answers. The crew is not looking too hot. Frankie's covered her bruised neck up, and Felix has a bandage on the back of his. They discuss what they could remember from the email. Some numbers, a row of X's, and the main thing being a phrase: "Look for me where my family isn't." I should probably note here that the 7 puzzle boxes sent out by Jeremy were actually sent out to Stagtown ARG players in real life, who deciphered them and sent back an email with what they discovered. So these clues were actually deciphered by real people. It's a very cool way to do an ARG and makes the story feel somewhat interactive without making this real life knowledge necessary to read the comic. It's a really neat idea. Anyway, they're not sure what any of this means and wonder if it connects to the mines. Jeremy did some research and found an iron company that started in the early 19th century, but the operations were suddenly halted and the owners left town. It's unclear why, but there are documents saying they struck something underground and there were several mysterious fatalities afterwards. It's not clear how the carousel factors into this, other than the carousel field is not far from the mine shaft they crawled out of. They try to think back on everything they know, and Frankie mentions once again that the creature that attacked them at the library and possessed Felix didn't seem to want to kill them. Maybe its strategy is just to lower their morale and isolate them by finding their biggest weaknesses. But that still doesn't answer why. They need to find more clues about Nova, who's likely dead at this point. Frankie suggests, since the clue mentioned family, that they look at the cemetery. It seems to be a dead end, no pun intended, but while Felix and Jeremy argue over what the numbers from the email mean, Frankie notices something: a large family crypt with the name Lillian Overton on it. She uses her hand to cover up parts of the name, singling out 4 letters: Nova. So the label on the box was just the middle of the name, the rest having been torn off. It also fits the clue: look for me where my family isn't. This is a family crypt, yet it only has one name on it. After arguing over the ethics of entering someone's grave, Frankie takes a look at the lock on the doors. She can't pick it because, weirdly enough, it's fake. In fact, the doors are not meant to be opened at all. So they investigate the rest of the structure and find a door-shaped indentation on the back, along with 3 circular flower designs. Frankie tries turning one and finds that the tops come loose and inside are 3 dials. It seems that this is what the numbers might be for. She gets the digits from Jeremy and moves the dials accordingly. Then a secret door opens up. As it does, a strange bent piece of metal falls on the ground. Not sure if it's important, Frankie grabs it and they enter. However, finding the door was only the first part of the puzzle. Inside on the floor, there are 3 giant circles with rings of symbols inside. In the middle of each circle, patterns are cut into the concrete. After looking over it for a while, Jeremy asks Frankie for the metal thing that fell out of the door and finds that it fits into the slits in the middle of each circle. It can then be used to spin them. They also find that amongst the symbols on each circle are X's. Remembering the 3 X's from the email, they turn each circle till the arrow points to the X's, and it works. The floor opens up to a hatch. I hope that all made sense if you're just listening. It's hard to explain puzzles like that without the actual visuals. But anyway, with nothing to lose, the gang heads underground, and finally we get some answers. I guess I should have expected that, seeing how it's the name of the chapter. They drop into what looks like a study of sorts. There's books and notes everywhere, and the walls are lined with red strings set in weird patterns. Felix finds a framed photo nearby of who they believe must be Nova, aka Lillian Overton. They also find an old tape recorder with a note simply saying, "Play me." They pop it on and we get an audio log from Nova. She explains that she came to Stagtown ages ago but found herself unable to leave. She tells of her struggles with the entity and how she doesn't think she'll ever make it out, even though she promised her mom she'd see her again. Well, there's some sadness I didn't expect to experience. She says that if someone is listening, then they'll likely know about the carousel. It calls to her, asking for her help. Eventually, she was led to the carousel and then underneath, where she encountered the entity. She describes it like a churning, raging rat's nest. It offered her a deal to help it, and in return, the rest of Stagtown would be spared. Too tired to keep trying to fight it, she agreed. Shortly after the recording, she plans on heading downriver and into the caves to find it once more, and hopefully end the madness. guess. With all her research, she believes this all has to do with the town's past and some terrible mistake made a long time ago. The carousel at the center of all of it. If she survives helping it, she'll remove this tape, but she suspects that she won't, and warns anyone that finds it not to help the entity. If it kills her, it'll kill them too. She says that it has the power to give people the sense of heavy guilt that drives them apart, which is how it manipulates people. She then says, "Good luck," and the tape ends. Chapter 15, Lockdown. They take everything they can carry from Nova's secret study along with the red string, which Nova claims the entity hates. Felix even uses some to make bracelets for the crew and a collar for Littles, of course. After looking through Nova's notes, Jeremy finds a lot of religious iconography but can't quite connect it back to the carousel. They do confirm that Nova created the eye symbol and even find drafts of it before she came up with the final design. Next to these is a note that reads, "Guilt haunts an innocent soul." As they discuss what this could mean, the electricity goes out in the entire building, which means they no longer have a security system and can't monitor the cameras. The city tells them it's a power outage and may be down for a few weeks, but they know this isn't a coincidence and that the entity is after them. They now have no security and most of their refrigerated food has gone to waste. They paint Nova's symbols in red all over the apartment, hoping it'll protect them, but they have another big problem as well. The ATMs in town have stopped working, so Jeremy can't get any more money out. On top of that, the shops refuse to run it, saying that the entire town's internet is down. People seemed concerned about all of this at first, but the entity still has control, and people just go on like nothing happened. After days of this, the situation is getting pretty desperate. At this point, they're running out of cash and could get evicted for not paying rent. Plus, food is an ever-present issue. Felix is frustrated and suggests that they just try taking the hiking trails. It's the only exit out of Stagtown that they haven't attempted yet, but Jeremy says he actually did try taking them, and even using a compass, he would always end up right back in Stagtown. On top of that, he says he felt like something big was watching him in the woods. I don't like the sound of that. A few days later, Felix and Jeremy are making dinner, and Frankie is drawing when someone rapidly approaches the apartment and repeatedly knocks. Everyone's on edge at this point, obviously, and they cautiously look through the peephole to find a random woman. It's actually Jeremy and Frankie's landlord that you may remember from way back at the beginning of season 1. However, as soon as she starts talking, it's clear that something's wrong here. Her voice sounds just like how Felix's did when he was possessed, and trying to get Frankie to let him in. After putting this together, Frankie just yells at her, saying this isn't going to work and to let that poor woman go. The lady just keeps talking like she didn't hear anything, which is odd because the possessed Felix actually responded to her and tried to persuade her to open up. They soon realize the symbols they painted must keep the entity from seeing or hearing inside. After a while, this woman suddenly goes silent, and Frankie looks through the peephole to see if she's left. We then see that the woman is holding a pistol in her hand, and in a truly shocking moment, she puts the gun to her head, and we hear a gunshot. Something Frankie is forced to witness in gruesome detail. I mean, wow, I didn't expect this story to take such a dark turn. It seems the entity is willing to go to any lengths at this point to convince Frankie to help them. Frankie just completely crumbles into Jeremy's arms in shock, and realizing what happened, the other two are terrified as well as we hear the sounds of the other residents discovering the body. Next, we see a strange scene. The apartment is dark and Jeremy begs Frankie not to look through the peephole. She ignores him, and when she does, there's a gun pointed at her on the other side. It goes off and Jeremy suddenly wakes up. I guess this last part was only a nightmare brought on by the traumatizing event that they witnessed. At this point, the three of them are all sleeping in the same room together out of fear, and Jeremy looks over at Frankie sleeping and touches her hand. Felix then wakes up and Jeremy starts to vent to him, feeling like he's breaking down. He's terrified about what could happen, but Felix comforts him and tells him he'll never let anything happen to them. As they talk, there's another knock at the door. It's repeated furiously, and they wake up Frankie. They realize that the same thing that happened to the landlord could just keep repeating, and that they have to leave. They make a rope from the bed sheets and climb down from the window. Taking Felix's car, they drive off into the night with no idea where they're going. We move into another Remember segment. In the last one, we got some insight into Stagtown in the 1800s when a man talked about building a carousel in the field behind his house. Well, this one is from the perspective of a little girl whose father was hired to make the carousel, and it gives us even more clues as to what started all of this. The girl says her father was hired by the rich man on the hill to collect animals without hurting them, which is quite difficult. Of course, the only nearby animals are the abundance of deer. The girl peeks into the barn where they keep the animals and is frightened by how they're mistreated. Essentially, what we're learning here is that the rich man plans to build a carousel with real animals, but the wild stags are difficult to tame. Clearly, the father is frustrated, and his daughter has a conversation with him where she offers her stuffed rabbit up for the carousel, which is kinda sweet. She says that she tried to pull the rabbit on a sled made from sticks tied together, but he wouldn't listen either, like the other animals, and kept falling off. So she eventually stuck pins in his legs to keep him on. The father thinks about this for a minute and then says, "You know, that's not such a bad idea." Oh god, I hope he's not going to do what I think he's going to do to those deer. Chapter 16, Playtime. After driving for some time on the outskirts of town, Frankie and the boys finally decide to head to Bobby's place since it's effectively off the grid and he's friendly enough, at least with Jeremy. When they arrive, they find that the door is open and Bobby is missing. They look around and can't even find any food. Felix rages out, smashing a cup and yelling at Frankie in frustration, leaving her to cry and clean up his mess. I know he's just stressed out, but what a dick. Jeremy comes in to comfort Frankie and Felix immediately feels guilty for what he did. He then hears a scratching noise coming from the hall closet. He slowly opens it and a scream echoes through the house. The other two run to him and find that he wasn't the one who screamed. There's a little girl in the closet, and it just so happens to be one of the Marble House children named Ashley. Okay, brace yourself for a big information dump here. They give the girl a snack to eat and ask her why she's here and what the hell happened. We learn that Miss Davids, along with the other children, didn't leave town but headed down underground instead. An older boy named Noah convinced Ashley to run away with him, and she mentions how all the kids' stomachs would hurt when they didn't obey, but Noah taught her how to not feel sick by throwing up the bad stuff. Something Felix can relate to. Clearly, she's talking about the black goop from underground. She says that they tried to go to Frankie's apartment since she was the only adult that they knew, but she wasn't there. After wandering around for a while, they eventually found Bobby's garage and hid out in there, which explains why the gang found the sleeping bag when they were retrieving Jeremy's things. One day they saw that Bobby had left and she looked inside for food. She goes on to explain that a big thing attacked them. She simply describes it as big and scary and says that it attacked Noah, but that they had some honey still, which helped. It seems like it's the same honey that kept Jeremy alive in the underground and that it has some healing qualities, or at least can stabilize the effects of the entity's control. We also learned that Noah is still in the shed. After he got hit really bad by the creature, he told Ashley to leave him there to rest, and she says that all he does is sleep now. Oh god. Hearing this, they enter the garage and look around for him. In the corner where the sleeping bag was, they do find the boy Noah, but judging by their reaction, he's dead. Yet another sad moment I wasn't expecting at this point. Frankie quickly puts on a happy face and tells Ashley to go along with Felix while her and Jeremy bring Noah to a hospital. In reality, they're forced to bury the boy in the backyard. Jeremy pulls out a bottle of liquor and they can only bring themselves to do it after having a few drinks. Inside, Felix plays finger puppets with Ashley to distract her, while outside, Jeremy and Frankie have finished the job. They even put a cross over the boy's grave tied together by a red string. At this point, the two are a little drunk and cynical. Now they have another mouth to feed and still no food. Eventually, they think they'll just have to steal some. Later inside, Jeremy asks Ashley more about the honey and how it ended up with him in the underground. She says that the black stuff told her what happened to Jeremy, and Miss Davids told him that he was sleeping down there just in case he changes his mind, so she sent the kids down to him to give him honey. Ashley tried to tell Frankie about Jeremy, but her stomach would hurt if she tried, so she drew a picture for her instead. So in retrospect, the disturbing drawing of what looked like Jeremy's death was actually Ashley trying to show Frankie that Jeremy was safe underground. Even after Miss Davids and the other kids left, Ashley and Noah continued bringing the honey to Jeremy. She says it's because he was so nice to them when he worked at the house. This whole thing does seem to confirm that the entity was keeping Jeremy alive temporarily and that it can only use a certain kind of person to become its helper, Jeremy being a candidate. Frankie cuts in and asks Ashley something. How did she even know that Frankie knew Jeremy, since she never mentioned him while working at the house? Ashley starts to answer, but Jeremy cuts her off, saying that he needs to be the one who tells them this. He believes that the helper that the entity needs must be an outsider, someone not from Stagtown. He tells her about how he actually met her when she first arrived in Stagtown, and that was years ago now. Frankie's actually years older than she thinks she is from all the memory wipes, and the biggest revelation of all, she's not from here. When she first met Jeremy, she said she had never been to Stagtown. As Jeremy tells her this, Frankie and Felix experience sudden and horrible headaches, seeing visions of the carousel in the process. Jeremy gives them both some of the honey, and it actually does seem to help, nullifying the effects. Jeremy is guilty, saying he should have never risked telling them this. He just wanted Frankie to remember so badly. Unfortunately, she doesn't regain any of her actual memories as a result, but Frankie tells Jeremy it's okay. She doesn't want to talk about her past anymore anyway, and they just need to focus on the task at hand. She asks the girl if the entity has any weaknesses, and she doesn't think so, but she does say that if you feel guilty about things you've done, it'll get you. But it's okay because you can get someone to eat the bad guilt and you'll feel better. They stare at her like, what the hell are you talking about, kid? But surprisingly, Jeremy backs her up, saying she must be talking about a sin eater. This was an ongoing practice between the 17th and 19th century. Back in the day when someone died, the family could call a sin eater and make them eat a small loaf of bread over the dead body. Supposedly, they ate the sins of the dead person, leaving their soul free to go to heaven. The sin eaters were usually poor outcasts struggling to survive and would do this ritual just to get some food and a small payment. This is a completely real practice, by the way. Frankie is shocked that Ashley would even know about this, and Ashley says Miss Davids told them about it because it was important to their mission in helping find a special person for the entity. She also mentions the marbles that Miss Davids had them make. Jeremy asks if she has one, and he has Felix try to break it open. Sure enough, the marble breaks and inside black goo pours out. So the entity forced the kids to make marbles, and then Miss Davids would sell them outside of town to hopefully draw people in as potential helpers. Okay, I know this has been a dense chapter, but I just couldn't spare any details here, as everything this little girl is telling them is major to the Stagtown mystery and the truth behind what the entity wants. Later, Frankie finds Jeremy sad outside and asks him how long they've known each other. The reason she brushed it off earlier was she didn't want to know about all the time that she's lost, but it seems like she probably should. She starts rambling, wondering what type of person she was before, but as she does, tears well up in Jeremy's eyes. When she finally notices, Frankie tells him it's okay, it's not your fault, and not to blame himself for anything, but he cuts her off, saying it's not about that. He gives her a huge hug and talks about how bad it was when he lost her. She forgot him and probably won't ever get those memories back. It hurts so much losing her, and he just misses her. She tells him that he's wrong, he hasn't lost her, and that he's not alone. Then she kisses him on the cheek, and we can see his face turn red. Alright, so maybe Frankie has some feelings for Jeremy as well. They get up to head inside, and Frankie finds the saucer keychain on the ground. She hands it to Jeremy and asks where he got it anyway. He just replies that it was a gift from someone very special. Chapter 17, Cracks. After an inventory check, they find that they're officially out of food, and there's no other option but to head into the city and grab some with their remaining money. Felix is against the idea at first because someone would have to stay behind with Ashley, but they just can't risk bringing her into the city. So Felix and Frankie are going to get the food in the morning while Jeremy hangs back with the little girl. The night before, Ashley builds a fort in the living room, and they're forced to keep the lights off at night to not draw attention, so Jeremy gives her his keychain as a nightlight. The next day, they finally head out into the city. On the drive, Felix apologizes for yelling at Frankie the day before, saying he doesn't handle stress very well. They discuss shoplifting if necessary, but Felix is against it, and hopefully they can buy what they need and bolt. They make it to the store, and when they finish shopping and get to the register, the cashier just stares at Felix, saying nothing. His eyes are black, and when they turn around, they find all the people in the store are just stopped and staring at them. They grab the food and run out of the store toward the car. When they arrive, however, they find that a mob has gotten to it first and tip it over before chasing after them. At this point, they have to escape by foot, and the food is only slowing them down, so they're forced to ditch it. Damn, they were so close. The mob closes in on them as they tuck into an alley and hop a fence. Out of desperation, they try a nearby door to an apartment building, and thank God it's unlocked. They run down a flight of stairs until they end up in the basement and find several storage units. Frankie looks around until she finds a unit that isn't locked. They're only shot at a hiding place. They get inside, but can hear the clatter of footsteps descending the stairs. Back at the house, Jeremy is starting to get worried. It's been a bit longer than he hoped. He asks Ashley more about the big thing that attacked Noah and what it looked like. She describes it as a big thing with a scary face that had teeth, and we actually get a small glimpse of the creature in the darkness. Jeremy begins to wonder if this creature was the reason Bobby left. Meanwhile, back at the storage unit, Frankie and Felix hide as the mob searches the area. One person goes so far as to take a look in the unit they're hiding in, but luckily doesn't do a thorough job. The problem is, as he leaves, he latches the padlock. They're safe from the mind-controlled residents, but now they're trapped. Frankie tries to pick the lock, but it's difficult reaching through the bars and not being able to see it. In a bad turn of luck, she also drops her pick. Tension is high and they argue for a bit. Frankie's worried that Jeremy might come after them. They joke about who he likes more, and then it takes a more serious turn as Felix reveals that he thinks he may have feelings for Jeremy, not just as a friend. He asks Frankie not to tell Jeremy, and they get back to the problem at hand. I've found that this little exchange is actually quite controversial online, but we'll touch more on that later. Right now, they need to escape. Frankie says she already got all the tumblers to bind on the lock, and she utilizes Felix's long arms and a small rake tool to try and open it. It's a struggle, but Felix manages to get the lock open, and he's quite proud of himself. We move into another Remember segment, and this time we get some major revelations regarding the carousel and what went wrong. Thankfully, the animals aren't nailed down to the carousel, but they are fixed to it using metal shackles screwed into the floor, as well as muzzles that are fastened to the wall to keep their heads straight. We see the carousel from the deer's perspective, being spun around against their will and unable to move, their eyes wide and legs shaking. It's pretty barbaric and sad to think about. Worst of all, the animals are kept there overnight while the partygoers get drunk inside. Wolves begin to approach from the forest, and the next day, everyone finds a horrific sight at the carousel. The deer were slaughtered and eaten by the wolves. There's blood covering the field. These sons of bitches basically made rotisserie chicken for the wolves. The poor animals were locked in place and couldn't even try to run. It's pretty awful. After the carousel incident, Stagtown suffered a terrible drought, and the crops began to dry up. The townspeople braced themselves for a difficult winter and couldn't help but wonder if this was punishment for the sins committed against God's creatures. Was it judgment being cast on the foolish rich man on the hill? But the people kept quiet about it, not wanting to anger the rich man who helped build up the town so much with his wealth. However, as time went on, things only got worse. Animals became hard to catch, and there was a total absence of deer in the forest that once littered the area. Soon the townspeople resorted to acts of paganism, leaving gifts and offerings at the edge of the forest to try and appease the spirits they blamed for their misfortune. The town condemned the act, but as the crops continued to fail, it only happened more often. The rich man tried to help wherever he could and gave money to the poor, but it didn't help. Over time, the people began to blame the rich man for the unjust act and the following punishment. One night, a mob gathered and made for the rich man's house. And that's where this segment ends for now. Chapter 18, Flight. Frankie and Felix make their way out to the street and try to make a plan of escape, but they don't have many options without the car. They can also hear what sounds like a large crowd of people moving somewhere nearby, as well as the sound of a vehicle heading right toward them. They tuck into an alley and see a green truck barreling down the road. Oddly, it seems like it's on the run as well. A car tries crashing into it, and a mind-controlled man throws his body in front of it with a sickening crack just to try and stop it. Well, it works, and the man driving the truck stops and gets out. It turns out it's Bobby, Jeremy's conspiracy nut friend whose house they're currently hiding out in. Frankie flags him down, and after a moment of surprise, he tells them to get in the back. They drive off, and Bobby tells them what happened. He was chased out of his house by a large creature, likely the same one that Ashley mentioned, and hid out in a secret campsite he has in the woods. He ran out of food and came into town only to be faced with the same hostility as Frankie and Felix. As he drives toward the back roads, he finds there's a blockade up ahead, forcing him to turn into a nearby alley. He tells Frankie and Felix to hop out and that he'll draw them away since it's his truck they're searching for. That actually gives Frankie a better idea. Next thing we know, the truck is sitting still in the alley and a resident spots it, pulling up in their car. As they do, Felix comes out from hiding and punches the guy in the face before jacking his ride. Bobby and Frankie come out as well, and they all get in. At least now they aren't being targeted. They get back to Bobby's place and he tells them this is goodbye. He's gonna try and make a break for it out of town via the bridge. Maybe since he's not one of the criteria for the entity's helper, he can escape. He tells them about a supply shelter that's hidden behind the house and gives them the code to get in, and then he speeds off. And that's the last we see of him. Bye bye Bobby. They rush into the house and find that Jeremy and Ashley are perfectly fine. They tell him to grab their stuff and that they need to move quickly. The mob could show up here at any time. They make their way out back and look around for a sign of the shelter, and as they do, they can hear multiple cars pulling up to the house. They see an unusual rock formation and frantically look around until they finally spot a trap door. Meanwhile, the mob is wrecking Bobby's house, searching for them, and eventually they start making their way to look around outside. Luckily, this is just as everyone has gotten into the trap door safely. They turn the lights on and find it's a fully stocked fallout shelter with beds and plenty of room. This is why it's nice to have a doomsday prepper as a friend. They have everything they need here, at least for a while. Even better, Bobby has a security system hooked up with several cameras watching the house and the trapdoor, all on a closed system so it can't be messed with. They watch the security monitors and hope to God that the possessed townspeople don't spot them. They do get pretty close to the shelter, but eventually turn around and leave. A huge sigh of relief. Now that they can relax for a minute, they look around the shelter more and find some cool stuff, including a bike, which Jeremy informs them is great in a post-apocalyptic scenario since you don't need gas and it doesn't make any noise. They also find some guns, but all the ammo is locked in a safe and they don't have a code to it. Probably a good thing since none of them have any idea how to work a firearm. They're safe for now, but they also don't know what their next move is. At night, Jeremy stays up and watches the monitors for any activity, and Frankie and Felix take inventory of the supplies to see how long they can survive down here. It's only stocked for one person, so they're probably going to run out of food eventually. While they're alone, Felix brings up his feelings for Jeremy again. I told you we'd get back to this. He starts to vent about it, but Frankie tells him that it's not uncommon for people to get attached to others in incredibly stressful situations. They've all been through a hell of a lot, and it is odd that these feelings seem to have come out of nowhere, so she tells him however he really feels, he's not going to figure it out while they're in this mess. She tells him to just wait until they're out of Stagtown to think about it with a clear head. Felix agrees, but throws it back at her, questioning her feelings for Jeremy. She loudly interrupts him and just says that she wants a fucking nap. She says she wants to leave this town, go someplace else, and sleep for 3 days straight, and she's not thinking about anything else until after that. After this, Jeremy calls Felix and Frankie over, and they take a look at the monitors. He points to the upper right camera, and a huge black figure seems to pass by, but it's hard to make out. It seems like it's searching for them around the house, and little friend starts growling. Chapter 19, Fight. The entity continues to circle the house for several days until one morning it vanishes. Still, they take shifts watching the monitors and everyone is on edge. Frankie's even found a few gray hairs from the stress, and they're running out of supplies quicker than they thought. During one of Frankie's shifts at the monitors, she sees a disturbance on 2 of the cameras. They've gotten extremely fuzzy, and then, one by one, they go out. It seems like the entity is interfering with the feed, but it still doesn't seem to know where they are and is only messing with the cameras by the house. Jeremy declares he's sick of hiding and that sooner or later it'll find them. It's time that they try and fight back. He picks up an aerosol can and lighter and shows them how they can make small flamethrowers, assuming that this creature is also afraid of fire. He also says that they have the supplies and he could make Molotov cocktails as well. They decide they're on board to try and defeat this thing, but should go to the mines and try to attack the entity at its source. Problem is, how do they get there? They no longer have a car and there's no way they'll get there on foot. Frankie then says they do have a car. She pulls out her keys and reminds them that her car is sitting at the train station. It's just been sitting there ever since her and Felix met up on the tracks. Since then, they've been using his car. Well, it's been unused for a while, but hopefully it'll still run. The plan is to have one person take the bike to go retrieve it since the train station is pretty close. Then they'll use Ashley and Noah's secret route into the tunnels. Frankie pulls a few strips of paper at different lengths and they draw them like straws to see who will be the one to go get the car. Jeremy pulls the short paper, so in the dead of night, he takes the bike and makes his way to the road. Here it's revealed that he cheated, tearing his paper shorter to trick them. He believes it's his turn to protect them after dragging them into all of this danger. Lit only by the moon, Jeremy starts pedaling to the train station. Back in the shelter, Frankie and Felix discuss what to do about Ashley. Obviously, she can't come with them into the mines, and with the creature outside closing in on them, it's not safe here in the bunker for much longer. They finally decide to leave Ashley in the car outside the mines and can hide her in the back seat. Still risky, but they don't really have any other choice. Jeremy makes it to Frankie's car without any issues, and after jump-starting the car with a portable battery, he gets it running. Just as he closes the hood, he hears a rustle in the woods nearby and looks over to see a stag watching him, although it just stares at him doing nothing. He slowly gets in the car and starts driving back to the shelter. Meanwhile, Frankie tells Ashley the plan, and the little girl just point blank asks her if they're gonna die. Frankie tells her no one's gonna die, but Ashley just shoots back saying that it already killed Noah. Yeah, I guess this girl isn't as naive as they thought, and she knew that they didn't take Noah to the hospital. Frankie hugs her and tells her she's sorry that she has to deal with all of this and that she deserves a normal life. She reassures her that she'll be okay in the car and that little friend will be with her to protect her. Just then, Felix spots something on the remaining following 2 cameras. The huge entity has shown back up and is dangerously close to the shelter. It disappears for a moment and they think maybe it left again, but suddenly it pops back up looking straight into the camera and screaming. That is horrifying, and right after the feed cuts out, now it for sure knows they're here. Next thing they know, the power shuts off entirely. Up top, Jeremy has made his way back to Bobby's and is now on foot heading toward the shelter. Little does he know he's going right into a trap. Just as he closes in on the trap door, a massive rumbling and howl knocks him to the ground. He looks up and is at a loss for words at what he's seeing. The creature is right in front of him and we finally get a good look at it. It seems like it's composed of the black goo, but with a giant gaping mouth and large human teeth. Inside the creature's throat, there are several arms hanging out of its flesh. Are these his previous victims? Who knows, but this thing is frightening to say the least. Jeremy finds his resolve, however, and pulls out a lighter and spray can to make his impromptu flamethrower. He lights it and shoots flame onto the creature's side. It lets out a shriek, but doesn't back down. Instead, it grabs an entire tree and throws it at Jeremy, who narrowly avoids it. In the process, he loses his lighter, and after fumbling around for it, he turns around to see that the monster is closing in despite the fire spreading on its body. The arms dangling in its mouth and multiple eyes on its head. Right before it gobbles Jeremy up, an explosion of flames hits the beast once more. Frankie and Felix have showed up just in time to toss a Molotov at the guy. Frankie chucks one more at the creature and it seems to have been a finishing blow. Only problem is the whole forest is starting to burn down. They find Ashley and little friend waiting for them and they all make their way towards Frankie's car. After being forced out of every home they've had and constantly on the run, the truth has become clear to Frankie. There is no escape. There is no way out. It's finally time to fight back and hopefully put an end to all this. They arrive outside the secret entrance to the mine and gear up. Jeremy tries to tell Frankie something in case they don't make it, but she interrupts him saying that's quitter talk. He can tell her when they make it out of here. She's so determined to beat this thing that it actually makes him laugh. Meanwhile, Felix has one last chat with Ashley, telling her that if she hears anything to hide under the blanket and be still and quiet as a rock. The other two show up and say their goodbyes, but before they go, Ashley gives Frankie the flying saucer keychain since it's so dark in the underground. From there, the trio make their way into the mine. In the final Remember segment of Stagtown, we continue where we left off. The villagers of Stagtown forming a mob and raiding the rich man's home. They kill everyone inside, including the children. Jeez. The people then took the bodies of the dead and burned them at the foot of the forest as one last offering, hoping to finally end the supposed curse. With the rising smoke, the people hoped their guilt would rise away with it, but the forest, it seems, would not be satisfied so easily. A single spark was all it took to catch a nearby tree on fire, which quickly spread until the forest they worked so hard to appease burned to the ground. Talk about a backfire. Months passed and eventually a stranger showed up, one who would for some small amount consume the crimes of the dead and let them ascend to heaven while he sank lower to hell. A sin eater, carrying the sins of hundreds, maybe thousands. But the town decided they could use him. They dug up the burned bodies of the rich family and told the man that they died from disease. On their caskets, they lay some drink, some bread, and a measly sum of coins. However, the sin eater knew better. The stench of months-old decay was all around, and it was clear that this family had not died recently. He refused to eat their sins, but the townspeople wouldn't have it. Their guilt rose up until the angry mob killed the sin eater, which only led to more guilt. They were out of chances, and over time the people all died. But beneath the soil, deep down, their souls still raged and wept. Guilt and despair still pooling like a foul black substance. Many years later, Stagtown built a new carousel. This is the end of the Remember segment, but now we have most of the backstory as to how all of this began. Chapter 20, Record. The three friends travel through the dark caves and discuss their plan. They're going to try and find the underground carousel and light the pool of goo on fire, hopefully destroying enough of it so that it can't regroup. As they walk, they soon find the ground to be wet, and Jeremy points out that there's some moisture on the walls as well. However, when he takes a closer look with his flashlight, he finds this isn't water. It's the black liquid poking through. As he realizes this, it starts bursting through the walls until finally a flood of water pours out without filling the tunnel. They try to brace themselves on the cave walls, but the tunnel fills up and it sends them all underwater. Jeremy and Felix manage to get onto a nearby ledge and help Frankie up, but their gear is all wet now and they only have one flashlight left. Earlier they wrapped some matches tightly in tinfoil hoping to keep them dry, and at least they still have the spray cans and lighters. But now where do they go? Jeremy ties the remaining flashlight to his arm so he doesn't drop it, and out of options they begin to wade into the stream to slowly make their way down the tunnel. As they do, the stream only gets stronger and they find it harder and harder to stay upright. Eventually they can't hold on and get sent downstream into the dark. Up ahead the cave splits, sending Felix and Jeremy one way and Frankie another. Jeremy holds onto Frankie's hand with all of his might, but it's no use. They're pulled apart and the party is split. Outside in the car, Ashley is sleeping when she hears a rustling nearby. She pulls the blanket over her and little friend and tries her best to become a rock. The noises continue and finally she slowly peeks out at the window. At first she sees nothing, and then a person appears glaring in. It's pretty creepy and feels right out of a horror film. Back in the caves, Frankie finds herself in the dark, alone and crying. She pulls out Jeremy's keychain from her pocket and lights it up. But when she sees it, she only breaks down even further, telling herself she can't do this. As she cries, she looks up and sees a glimmering in the dark. She looks over and finds an old tape recorder, much like what Nova used to record her message. However, when she presses play, she doesn't hear Nova's voice, but her own. As the tape plays, we get a flashback of Frankie as she recorded it. She's got shorter hair and specifically mentions Jeremy, calling him Jojo, so it's clear that this is Frankie before any of the memory wipes. She says she's recording on an analog tape recorder because Jeremy taught her not to use digital equipment since the paranormal can interfere with it. It seems she heard about a supernatural hotspot in the woods and stumbled onto this mine shaft. She says Jeremy's birthday is in less than a week, so what better present than to show him this place after scoping it out to make sure it's not blocked off or anything. She says there was a rickety old ladder down the shaft, but she found some footholds on the side to take instead. This is actually an important detail for later. After exploring for a while, Frankie stumbles upon the underground carousel. She freaks out a little bit, but says that Jeremy will be psyched to see this. She approaches the pool at the bottom and finds the black liquid. It springs to life and knocks her on her ass. She drops the tape recorder in the process and runs like hell. We hear whispery voices as it messes with the various buttons, asking, "What is it? What does it do?" It plays and rewinds the tape a few times. We cut to Frankie, who's escaped the mine, only to be hit with a sharp pain and headache, her first memory wipe. She heads back to the apartment where Jeremy's waiting for her to go on their big trip, only as we've seen before, she doesn't know who he is. Back in the present, Frankie comes to the realization that the entity learned from the tape recorder how a memory can be rewound and recorded over. By leaving the tape recorder there, she inadvertently was the one who taught it how to erase memories. She tells herself that all this time, it really was her fault. Chapter 21, Rat King. Clutching the tape recorder, Frankie makes her way through the tunnel until she enters into the large space with the broken carousel. In front of her, there's a path between the black liquid lit by green bulbs. She walks to the base of the carousel and the stairs underground open up once more. She drops the tape recorder and willingly walks down the steps without saying a word. Inside, she finds a massive pool of the black sludge and a sort of pedestal made from the cave's natural formation. In it sits a piece of bread. Then out of the pool rises the form of a massive creature, like dozens of rats fused together. One large rat head looks at Frankie with a bloodshot eye. It seems this is the Stagtown entity's final form. She asks it where her friends are, but it doesn't answer, implying that they're dead. Then she asks why it's doing this and why it wants her. A mouth appears, opening from the black mass, and for the first time we hear the entity fully speak, simply saying, "Very well," as if it's decided to give her an answer. It says that long ago they did something foolish and angered the spirit of the forest. Then they were punished for it. For their amusement, they made the first carousel and left animals to die on it. The forest, in retaliation, filled their lives with misery. It wouldn't accept their apologies and could not be satisfied by offerings. When the Sin Eater refused to help them, they killed him as a sacrifice, but still the forest ignored them. Even after death, it has held them here. Their bodies are gone, but they still remain trapped under the soil. Unable to speak, their anger and sadness slowly formed into a black mass, forced together by their wicked ways, tangled like a nest of rats and pooling into a lake of sins. One day, miners came and freed them from the grip of the rock. Years passed, and to their shock and anger, the town built a new carousel, the very thing that kept the spirit of the forest mad at them. Their rage allowed them to crack the surface of the earth and destroy the carousel, pulling it underground, along with every Stagtown resident, man, woman, and child. child. Their souls only joined into the darkness below. Over the years, they thought and thought on how to escape their torment until finally they realized they would have been freed if the Sin Eater had not refused them. So they needed a new Sin Eater to take their guilt. After much persuasion and persistence, they eventually convinced Nova to take on the sacrifice. She ate the Sin Eater's bread, but nothing happened. The ritual failed. So they killed her. After this, they realized that they must replicate the ritual exactly, and they would need a Sin Eater from outside of Stagtown, much like the original Wanderer all those years ago. That's where Frankie came in, the next Sin Eater who will eat their guilt and free them. Frankie then asks the creature what'll happen if she agrees. Will she die? The entity responds saying they have no way of knowing. Frankie then says it's taken everything from her, everyone she cares about. If she's gonna die anyway, there's no reason to help it. Hearing this, the rat looks over, and out of the pool rise Felix and Jeremy. I guess they're not dead after all. But with their lives on the line, it asks her, now are you ready to help? Felix and Jeremy wake up confused, and the entity presses Frankie again, saying they will die unless she becomes the Sin Eater. Jeremy pleads with Frankie not to do it, saying this is all his fault somehow. Frankie realizes in that moment what's happening, and what's happened all along. It's using their guilt to control them. Frankie proclaims there is no forest god or spirit of the animals, and there never was. Just a terrible incident and a string of bad luck. But they were so afraid they invented something to blame it all on. The only thing holding them here is guilt, because the people of Stagtown refused to take responsibility for what they did. The ritual will never work, not until they admit that they were the ones who messed up. She asks them who she's eating the bread for anyway, who among them is the most guilty. The rat starts to rage at her, but then another rat head pops out and blames the rich man. Another follows after and blames the ones who worked for the man. This continues on as the creature argues with itself amongst the many rat heads. In the meantime, Frankie grips the keychain in her hand and gets an idea. The creature isn't happy about the turmoil she caused, and in rage tries to kill her. She dodges and falls to the ground. She quickly cracks open the saucer keychain, exposing its wires and battery, and pulls the tinfoil from the matches out of her pocket. She shoves it into the side of the battery, trying to get a spark, but suddenly a huge amount of the sludge drops onto her, sending the flying saucer out of her hands. The giant rat head moves in on Frankie, ready to devour her, screaming over and over that she's to blame, as many eyes appear across its body. It's pretty terrifying. At the same time, the keychain bounces across the ground and lands with a thud, causing a small spark to shoot out. Much like when the people of Stagtown accidentally burned down the forest, all it takes is one spark. It lights up the pool, sending flames up the rat's body as it screeches in agony. It mutates and melts into a disfigured mess as the flames overtake it. And looking closely, you can actually see the faces of the souls amassed inside, crying out in terror. As it burns, it drops Felix and Jeremy, and they get up as the trio run for their lives out of the mine. Behind them, the giant rat screams and tries to eat them all in one last attempt, but crumbles in the process. They make it up the stairs, and we can see the fire spreading out of the entity's lair and onto the rest of the black liquid by the carousel. Remembering their last visit down, they follow the path from before until they get to the mine shaft, but if you remember, the ladder fell down the shaft last time. Frankie then recalls what she said on the tape recorder. There are footholds on the far wall. Wow, Frankie really saved her own ass here. They find the footholds and start climbing, but the burning rat is still trying to chase them down, and the flaming beast howls in the tunnel behind them. They make it to the surface to find burning cracks spreading rapidly across the ground. At this point, they believe the fire is spreading across the whole entity, which is great, except for the fact that they could die in the process. They make it back to the car and see several people on the ground around it. Luckily, Ashley is safe inside. She's obviously scared to death, but she's alive. She says that people showed up and started tapping on the car and tried to get in. It seems that the monster has gotten much weaker and relinquished its control of the people before they got in. Jeremy asks what they should do about them, but Frankie tells them it's not their problem and they need to leave now. They get in the car and Frankie floors it, doing her best to avoid the many cracks spreading all over town. At this point, with all the sinkholes, it looks like the entire town is going to collapse. As they drive, they can see buildings being pulled into the ground, and Frankie drives as fast as she can toward the tunnel. With the monster this weak, she thinks this time they can make it. However, a massive crack is forming right behind them, the entity's last attempt at killing them. Jeremy tells her to turn away from the bridge and avoid the crack, but she's determined as always and puts the pedal to the floor. Chapter 22. Us. Here we are, folks, the series finale and final episode of Stagtown. Frankie drives as fast as possible toward the tunnel exit as the bridge breaks behind them. This is their last chance, but the collapsing bridge causes the car to get stuck. The back tires are hanging off the edge. Ashley cries in the back and the crew believes this could be the end, but Frankie doesn't give up. She hits the gas until finally the wheel catches and sends them flying forward. As they approach the tunnel, Frankie hears a voice in her head telling her to go back, and a creepy figure starts to appear at the end of the tunnel. Frankie yells out, "Not this time," and keeps moving forward. We then see that familiar angle of the stag sculpture at the top of the tunnel, only this time, instead of Frankie going in, her car comes flying out. They made it, and the town collapses behind them. As the sun rises, we hear Frankie's inner monologue. She says no one can know how good the dawn feels until they've been through the longest, darkest night. How wonderful it is to see the sun come up, how relieved they feel. It's the darkness that makes the day seem much brighter, and it's so beautiful you hope it never sets again. We see them watching the sunrise, Felix playing with Ashley, and Frankie and Jeremy sitting by each other in the grass. This scene is actually in full color. Frankie continues wondering what they're supposed to do now and where their home is, but it doesn't matter. Now, they can go anywhere they want. Jeremy holds her close, and they look up at the blue sky. And that is the end of Stagtown. Well, there you have it. There's always a strange feeling finishing a series like this. It's satisfying wrapping up all the loose ends, but it's always a little sad since we've grown attached to the story and characters. What were your favorite moments, characters, and complaints? I'd love to hear all of them in the comment section. Shout out to Kill Me Katie as always for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now. And if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me a submission to the address below with a name or social media handle. As always, I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.
I can't reach his ghastly impressions. Nothing but forgetting illusions. I can't reach his ghastly impressions.
Frankie has recently moved back to her hometown, and something is just not right here. Strange security cameras are popping up all over the place, and no one knows who's watching. Unseen creatures loom around in the dark. Liminal spaces exist that defy reason, and for the love of God, what is wrong with the kids at the Marble House? This is Stagtown, and there's a dark mystery here connected to the town's oldest attraction, a carousel of galloping deer. Frankie, with the help of her conspiracy theorist neighbor, tries to get to the bottom of it, if she can survive that long. Hello friends, this is Grief speaking, and today we're diving into Stagtown. This is another webtoon comic that came highly recommended in the comments, and you guys did not steer me wrong. Stagtown is a compelling, smart, and eerie comic that I couldn't stop reading. It reminds me a lot of a Junji Ito manga, specifically Uzumaki, in the way that there's a mystery surrounding this town, and each chapter is a different encounter with something supernatural. There's over 100 episodes, but in this video I'm only covering the first 20, which compose the first 4 chapters. It's a great introduction to the series, but let me know in the comments if you'd like me to cover the whole thing. Either way, you should go over to Webtoons and read it yourself if you're interested. Anyway, let's get into this thing. This is Stagtown Explained. The story opens with music playing from an extravagant and beautiful carousel, but something is very wrong. The spinning stags begin to break free of their poles and leap out onto the ground. They stumble in pain as blood pours from their bodies. Here, the poles look as if they've impaled the living animals who fall to the floor. Nearby, a young woman watches all of this horror, the stags writhing around on the ground, and one suffering and trapped in webs still on the carousel. This is when we get the title page, and you get a clear idea of what you're in for with this comic. The young woman wakes up from this nightmare sitting in her car at the edge of the road. This is Frankie, our protagonist and narrator. She says that she recently moved back to her home, Stagtown. It's a tiny place in the mountains where nothing really ever changes. She left a few years ago to attend an out-of-state college, but she always knew she'd come back here someday. Chapter 1, Surveillance. I just have to point out how much I love the art on this page. It's disturbing and gorgeous. Frankie lives in a decent apartment on the east side of town, and the rent's pretty reasonable, although some of her neighbors are a bit odd. Like a guy named Jeremy, who's the resident conspiracy theorist. Tinfoil hats, Illuminati, that kind of guy. He spots Frankie in the hall and tells her that new spy cameras have been put up on the property. She assures him he's imagining things, but sure enough, he points out a security camera right behind her that is oddly pointing right at Jeremy's door. She tries to explain it by saying that it looks ancient and has probably been there since they built the place, but Jeremy protests, saying that if anyone would have noticed, he would. He adds that this isn't the only one. He's seen new cameras popping up all over town. Who's on the other side of these cameras, and why are they watching his door? Frankie chalks it all up to conspiracy talk and tells him to try and get some sleep for once. The next day, she makes a cup of coffee and sits down at her kitchen table when she notices something above her. In the corner of her kitchen is a security camera pointed right at her. She's obviously shocked and confused and decides that maintenance must have installed it while she was sleeping. This is a gross invasion of privacy, of course, and she slams her coffee down before marching to the landlord's office. When she exits the building, however, she finds that Jeremy might not be so crazy after all. There are dozens of cameras mounted everywhere, on every wall and pole in sight, and they're all the same out-of-date style. The news claims it's all a big prank or art project, but they're popping up in people's homes as well. And the town's traffic cams had all mysteriously stopped working the night before all of the new cameras were installed. Weirder, the cameras seem almost indestructible, and their cables all lead straight into the ground, through walls, or under boulders. While officials try to solve the issue, they recommend people just ignore the cameras for now, but everyone starts to carry umbrellas with them to hide themselves. Meanwhile, Frankie is forced to put up with the camera in her kitchen until maintenance can come and deal with it. Finally, she can't take it anymore and removes the camera herself, cutting the cord from the wall. Later in the evening, she heads out to run some errands, and when she returns, there's now 3 more cameras in the same spot. Although these are much more menacing looking and have metallic spider-like legs keeping them in place. After this, Frankie eats all of her meals in her bedroom and only orders takeout to avoid entering the kitchen. Everyone soon learns the same lesson. If a camera is taken down, covered up, or blocked, it's replaced overnight. And if you cut the wires, then more, even uglier cameras show up, and every camera cut down is replaced by 2 or 3 more. They're completely still, but those strange metal legs make it look like they could move if they wanted to. And everyone's wondering the same thing. Who's watching on the other side? This whole concept reminds me of a Junji Ito story called The Town Without Streets that I covered in my Junji Ito Explained series. In that story, a girl's family keeps spying on her through holes in the wall, and she eventually ends up in a strange town where everyone spies on each other through thousands of peepholes. Anyway, if you like this concept, you might like that one, but let's get back to the story. Finally, Frankie decides she's gonna stay at a motel out of town until this all blows over. But before she leaves, she feels like she should check on Jeremy the conspiracy theorist since she hasn't seen him in a few days. Unfortunately, it seems he's being watched more closely than anyone. There are now dozens of cameras in the hallway, all pointed at Jeremy's door. Sporting an umbrella to shield her from the watchful cameras, Frankie knocks on Jeremy's door, but doesn't get any response. She does, however, hear the sound of a cat meowing. She tells the landlord about the situation, and rather than being worried, the lady is pissed off about the fact that Jeremy has a cat in his apartment, since he doesn't have a pet deposit. She uses the master key to open his door, and when they enter, they see a pretty disturbing sight. The cat is pinned to the floor by one of the cameras. Frankie pulls the camera off of it, and luckily it wasn't severely harmed. What's really off-putting about this is that it implies the cameras can move after all. Otherwise, how could it get on top of the cat like that? Jeremy's apartment is pretty filthy, and his laptop is left open and on a website called Bigalope.com with text that reads "The Truth About Bigalope." This is an actual website you can visit, but we'll touch on that later as it has to do with the ARG attached to this comic. The weird thing about Jeremy's apartment is that there's surprisingly no other cameras inside it, just the one that pinned the cat down. There's also a large cardboard box sitting on the floor with mirrors taped all over it. They go ahead and open it and find a malnourished and dehydrated Jeremy inside, along with 6 cameras watching him. They get him to a hospital, and later he tells Frankie what happened to him. I guess he couldn't handle all the cameras watching him, so he made the box and hid inside. After a while, he lost all of his strength and couldn't crawl back back out. The cameras then made their way inside. He says that when he was at his weakest and everything was going dark, he could hear the cameras talking to him, voices from the other end of the wires. Creepy. Jeremy's always been paranoid, but this business about the voices is freaking Frankie out. She tells him that she plans on getting out of town for a bit and recommends he do the same when he gets released from the hospital. He says he can't wait for that and needs to get out now. Then he asks Frankie to take him with her and she leaves. She's hesitant but finally agrees. That night they get packed up and start to head out of town, but Frankie is still worried about Jeremy's recovery. He insists that he'll be safer leaving than staying, and so with Jeremy's cat cuddled up on his lap, they hit the road. As they drive through town, they start to notice that many of Stagtown's residents have begun wearing masks. I guess it's easier than carrying an umbrella around and a more efficient way to hide your identity. I hate to reference Junji Ito once again, but the story I mentioned earlier, The Town Without Streets, also features residents wearing masks. This aspect could be a direct inspiration from that comic, or maybe just the natural next step in a society without privacy. A mask might be your last line of defense in concealing your identity. But what would I know about that? Jeremy and Frankie make their way to the tunnel leaving town and find it to be blocked off, with several masked men guarding it. One of the men approaches Frankie and asks her to step out of the car. He says they just need to be sure she doesn't have any cameras with her. Apparently these guys want to stop the spread of what they call an infection outside of the town, so they're gonna search her car. Frankie yells at the guy and says it's not like it's some kind of disease and that she's not gonna be bullied by some half-assed militia. The masked man grabs her and tells his friend to get her keys. Meanwhile, Frankie screams for Jeremy's help. He gets out of the car and the masked men are kind of thrown off by his sickly appearance. At the same time, a camera watches from under the car and suddenly climbs up onto the roof. This is the first time we've actually seen one physically move. Jeremy grabs a nearby metal gas canister and gives the camera a good whack. Unfortunately, gas sprays onto his arms and the damaged camera sparks, lighting Jeremy on fire. It's a pretty scary sight. He falls to the ground, engulfed in the flames, and his eyes seem to be burning out of his skull. Somehow he can still move, and he jumps off the nearby cliffside. We watch as his flaming body falls into the river below. Frankie and the Masked Men look over the edge in shock. You know, Frankie and the Masked Men sounds like a cool band name. But anyway, she breaks down into tears, and upon looking at the broken camera, begins to scream at it, saying this is all their fault. She then realizes that the camera obviously didn't come with them, and crawls out of the woods. Next thing you know, the masked men begin to follow the wire from the camera into the woods, and Frankie, with no real reason other than curiosity, follows along. The camera cable isn't buried in the ground like the others in town, and it seems to go on forever. They finally find that the cable has led them right to an old graveyard, and after more investigation, they see that there are multiple cables throughout the cemetery, and that they do eventually go into the ground, right into the graves. The men begin to dig up the dirt at the protest of Frankie, who's against the idea, but they assure her that they're just gonna dig enough to free the cable. However, after quite a bit of digging, it's revealed that the cable goes right into the coffin itself. After some discussion, no one has the guts to open the casket and find out what's inside, so they all head home. Strangely, the next day, all the cameras in town just stop working. They dry up and drop to the ground like old vines. The police try searching for Jeremy, but aren't able to recover his body. We can see Frankie has adopted Jeremy's cat, and she points out that there's still one camera that remains in town and seems to watch people go by. But it seems harmless and everyone just ignores it. Like the others, the wire goes into the ground and can't be tracked, but some people claim it appears to head toward the river. That is the end of chapter 1, and what an interesting idea. What do you guys think is going on with the cameras? I like to think that because the cameras lead to graves, that somehow the dead were the ones watching, obsessed with the world of the living that they left behind. The final camera and its cable leading to the river could mean that this one belongs to Jeremy, who passed over and is now watching the town from wherever his body resides. So let's move into chapter 2, Marble House. Just before the start of summer, Frankie has gotten behind on some bills and needs to earn some extra cash to make ends meet. Having some experience giving piano lessons, she signs up on a local gig app and lists herself as a tutor, but nothing comes for the first few weeks, forcing her to lower her hourly rate quite a bit until finally she gets a request from a foster home on the other side of town. So she jumps at the opportunity and heads over for her first job. Here we get another beautiful title page with a huge and ominous house staring Frankie down. She meets with Miss Davids, the foster mother. She's a sweet old woman, and Frankie finds her doing some patchwork on the side of the house. I guess it's a known historic home in Stagtown called the Marvale House, and it has some major foundational issues, so they're hoping to sell it and move soon. Inside, they chat over tea, and Miss David says she thinks piano lessons would be great for the children. She's always trying to find hobbies for them, and right now they're interested in rock polishing, an idea she came up with from the kids mispronouncing the Marvell house as the Marble house. The kids make dozens of marbles from rocks as a hobby. Davids finally calls the kids down to come meet Frankie, but she mentions one last thing. The kids of the Marvell house have some kind of medical issue and must wear masks at all times. They try to make it fun by decorating the masks. Just then, the children come rushing down the stairs, and Frankie gasps at the peculiar sight of the children. All of their masks resemble the heads of different animals, and not like in a cutesy kind of way. They're pretty realistic looking. It's beyond eerie. We jump ahead 2 weeks, and Frankie says she wanted to leave after the first day, but she just really needs the money. And at this point, she's gotten used to the creepy masks. Though she does wonder if this is a home for kids with birth defects or disfigurements, and speculates that the masks may be a way of making them feel safer. Either way, they were really just normal kids. They did their lessons, played outside in the sandbox, finger painted, typical kid stuff. There's an interesting little detail here I only noticed on my second read through, but the light reflection on this kid's mask looks like a man falling. It's very reminiscent of Jeremy's fall into the river. Anyway, everything seems fine despite the masks. That is until the start of the third week. One night, sitting in the TV glow, Frankie hears a knock at her door. However, when she opens it, there's no one in sight. Looking on the ground, she spots a small envelope. She opens it and gasps at what she finds, but we don't get to see what it is. The next day, Frankie is at the Marvell house, claiming that the envelope must have been brought to her by one of the children. Miss Davids is surprisingly calm about the whole thing, even if this would suggest that one of her children walked across town by themselves at night. She says she'll find out who did it and give them a stern lecture, but she's also kind of glad that they did, and mentions how the kids have really taken a liking to Frankie, and that this is just an expression of that. We finally get a look at what was in the envelope, a drawing by one of the kids. The thing is, it's a child's rendition of what happened to Jeremy, almost exactly. The camera, the car, the river, and the flames. Very spooky, and you can see why it's so off-putting to Frankie. A few days later, the lessons resume, and they never found out which kid left the drawing. But Miss David's reaction to it was just really off. Frankie wonders if maybe she's just got a delayed shock or PTSD from the incident, and it might just be a coincidence. While she gives a lesson to the girl in the pig's mask, she notices the girl scratching under her mask. It seems to really be bothering her, and Frankie reluctantly asks if she needs to take it off for a moment. In a tense few panels, the girl begins to untie the pig mask. I should point out that while I'm going straight through this whole chapter, this would have been the end of an episode on Webtoons. So imagine a few years back, before the next episode launched, the anticipation of what was under the mask must have been unbearable. Anyway, she slowly removes the freaky mask, and Frankie is surprised to find a cute little girl underneath with no disfigurements whatsoever. So they continue the piano lesson until the girl seems to have something in her mouth. She suddenly spits out what appears to be a marble. It looks like one of the marbles the kids made polishing rocks. Gross, was that in her mouth the entire time? Worse than that, it seems she's storing more in her cheeks, and Frankie tells her to spit them all out. It's bad for her teeth. The little girl begins spitting several marbles out, and it's a lot more than expected. In fact, it's bizarre how many are coming out of this girl's mouth. She then convulses and starts puking dozens of balls out as her eyes roll to the back of her head. It's a bewildering and disturbing image. Up close, you can see the girl's mouth widening in an unnatural way as the marbles fill her cheeks. Absolutely terrifying. Frankie finally just screams and runs to find Miss David sitting in the living room. She tells her to call the hospital and grabs her shoulder, but this knocks loose the old woman's hat and glasses to reveal that the top of her head is just a massive hole filled with marbles, which come flooding out onto the floor. Frankie freaks out and slips on the marbles, hitting her head on the wall and falling to the ground. Then, in possibly the scariest portion of the comic so far, Miss Davids, or whatever this creature is, comes walking towards Frankie. Her flesh is twitching as marbles move under the surface of her skin, and she says, "I've lost my marbles, Frankie." Definitely one of the most disturbing puns of all time. Frankie's a bit woozy, but manages to run towards the door. However, this is actually the door to the basement, not the exit, and she opens it only to fall down the basement stairs into the darkness below. When she comes to, she finds that large chunks of the foundation's walls and floors have been dug out, and the children, without their masks on, are eating the rocks. There's a particularly gnarly close-up of a kid's bloody mouth and broken teeth as he inserts more rocks. Man, it makes my teeth hurt just looking at it. I guess the kids have been using their own mouths as rock tumblers to smooth them out out, and they spit them into a huge opening in the floor. Suddenly, a voice cries Frankie's name from the top of the stairs. It's Miss Davids, and her body has changed even more, resembling more of a monster than a human now. We can see her silhouette peeking in from the doorway, her neck and arms elongated. She starts to repeat the phrase, "I lost my marbles," once again. She makes her way towards Frankie, and we see her skinny hand grasp the wall, marbles shifting around under her skin. Ugh. Frankie has no choice but to jump into one of the holes in the floor filled with marbles and makes her way across to an egress window on the other side. She climbs up to it, but finds it's been glued shut. Meanwhile, Miss David's hand reaches out to grab her, and now the skin on her hand is stretching out and popping open, dropping marbles from her flesh. With no other option, Frankie picks up a rock and breaks the window open, climbing to safety but cutting her body up pretty bad in the process. Making it back to her car, she reports the house to the police. Knowing her story would sound made up, she instead makes an anonymous call of child abuse, hopefully getting them to at least investigate the house. A few days later, we see Frankie bruised and bandaged with a dozen band-aids covering her body from all the small cuts. She also has a large cut over her right eye, which actually stays throughout the comic. Kind of an interesting continuity detail. Anyway, Frankie reads the local newspaper and sees that the Marvell house has collapsed due to an undiscovered sinkhole. A gas pipe then broke and the place went up in flames. However, Miss Davids and the children survived and were relocated to another town. Frankie still doesn't know if this has anything to do with Jeremy's death, but she feels she needs to get the hell out of this town, and soon. In the final panel of the chapter, we see just outside Frankie's apartment door, a jar addressed to Frankie is filled with marbles and broken human teeth. One last gift from the Marble House children. That is a chilling image. Chapter 3, Carousel. The chapter begins with Frankie saying she's been doing alright despite the trauma she's endured the last couple months. She's had trouble sleeping though and has relied on sleeping pills. She's also convinced her landlord to let her move to another property of hers on the outskirts of town. She doesn't want the Marble House kids to know where she lives. She's actually got a great setup in a pretty nice building. Her landlord even gave her a big discount on rent because of Jeremy dying. I guess she thought Frankie and Jeremy were dating and it's the least she could do. This obviously isn't true, but Frankie just went along with it to get the discount. We see her throwing a bag into her car and hitting the road along with another gorgeous title page. Frankie's heading to her old apartment building. She can't stop thinking about what happened to Jeremy. He was the first person to notice the cameras. He said he heard voices coming from them, and then the awful Marble House children made that drawing. It's just too strange, and Frankie wants to get to the bottom of it. She tried asking if she could see Jeremy's things in the storage unit they were being kept in, but apparently the police weren't letting anyone touch the stuff until they could track down some relatives. Frankie's got a plan though. She walks into the leasing office with a pink hat rack. Yeah, it's pretty striking since this comic is mostly black and white. She tells the landlord that Jeremy let her borrow it, but it reminds her of him too much. So she thought it was best if it went back with his other belongings. After Frankie leaves, the lady calls a maintenance guy to haul off the rack and store it wherever Jeremy's stuff is. This is of course all part of Frankie's plan as she waits around to follow the guy. There are storage units all over the complex, so she needed to be sure where it was. Eventually the maintenance dude heads into the basement of Unit C and Frankie's got her location. She waits till after dark and heads into the building, having made a copy of the key before returning hers. Smart move. She enters the storage units, which are basically falling apart, and the lights are on an old switch timer. It's supposed to turn the lights off after a while to save on electricity, but it's been broken and only stays on for 5 minutes. Yeah, you can see where this is going. Anyway, Frankie continues down the hall looking into the barred storage unit until she spots the bright pink rack. Another clever move. As the switch timer ticks, she pulls out some bolt cutters and breaks the lock on Jeremy's unit. Before the timer hits 0, she remembers to crank it again before she starts looking through Jeremy's stuff. She repeats this process for hours as she searches through his things and so far hasn't found anything of note. That and the fact that she has to get up and turn the timer every 5 minutes is leaving her pretty irritated. Then she finally stumbles upon a black box with a lock on it. She puts it aside to look at later and finds another smaller box behind it. This one is wrapped up heavily in duct tape and has the number 5 on the front. Curious, Frankie pulls out her pocket knife and begins to cut it open. She loses track of time, however, and the switch timer shuts off while she does so. She gets up to turn it back on and sets the box down, which seems to be emitting a red glow. Well, that's not good. She didn't bring a flashlight and her phone is dead, so she stumbles into the dark looking for the switch when she hears a small scratching noise behind her. She pauses for a minute and doesn't hear it again, so she shrugs it off, finally finding the light and turning it on. When she gets back to the box, she takes a look inside to find Dirt. Yep, this is just a box of dirt. As she ponders this, the lights suddenly shut off again. Okay, it definitely hasn't been 5 minutes. Frankie once again bumps around in the dark until she finds the switch. Only this time, it shuts off seconds after she winds it. She then hears the scratching noise again, and it seems to be coming from the dirt box. Frankie hopes it's just a rat, but either way, she's ready to get the hell out of here, except for one thing. Her bag with her keys and ID is sitting on the floor by the unit. After a moment, she comes up with the idea of using her pocket knife to jam the switch, stopping it from prematurely turning off, and it actually seems to work. She dashes back to her belongings, shoving the black lockbox into her bag and pushing the rest of Jeremy's stuff into the unit before rushing back towards the exit. Just as she's reaching the door, the timer forces itself off again and launches the key into the air, whizzing by Frankie, narrowly missing her. She looks back at the knife on the ground, contemplating grabbing it, when she hears the scratching noise amplify in the darkness around it. At the horrifying noises, she just says, "You know what? Keep the knife, I'll buy a new one," and slams the door shut as she leaves. I like that this character doesn't fall into typical horror tropes. She's just like, screw it. Still, it was a frightening encounter. What the hell came out of that box? The next day, Frankie starts her attempt at getting into the lockbox. In order to do so, she's gotten a lockpick kit, and it actually opens pretty easy since it was just a basic padlock. My only question is, why not use the bolt cutters that easily broke the storage unit lock, which was much bigger? But I digress. Inside, she finds a pile of papers and a notebook, which would be useful, but it's all in code. Of course, Jeremy would put it in code. She also finds a picture of him and his cat, which visibly bums her out. She looks through the notebook, hoping to find something obvious, and stumbles upon some drawings of hearts with the words Jeremy plus Frankie written all over. I guess the poor guy had a big crush on her. Frankie responds out loud saying, "Ew." She looks over at the cat and starts to defend herself, saying, "Okay, not ew, but it just wouldn't have worked out between us. I mean, I don't know him at all." After a bit of rambling like this, she finally realizes she's explaining herself to a cat and starts looking back through the box. She finds a pin from the 1970 Stagtown Fair and some old photos and clippings. She also finds a pill bottle that contains dirt. Man, what was it with Jeremy and dirt? One of the newspaper clippings features the Stagtown Carousel and its history, so she decides to head over to this historic landmark and check it out. She explains a bit of the history that she can remember, that the carousel was built around 100 years ago at the edge of town, and that Stagtown had a history of building some of the first carousels, but this one was a true beauty and became somewhat of a tourist attraction. There's a funny moment where Frankie points out how weird it was back then to ride a horse to Stagtown just to ride a fake one on a carousel. That's a good point. She questions whether it's really connected to Jeremy or just a random article he found interesting. Either way, she continues onward until she arrives at the location of the carousel. Although, we soon learn that the spot is empty now, just a big field. People still call it the carousel though, even though the actual carousel was torn down decades ago. Frankie has a look around and doesn't find anything but grass and dirt. She remembers the bottle of dirt Jeremy had, and this gives her an idea. She rents a metal detector and comes back, but still finds nothing but some old change and an earring. It was a good attempt, but there's just nothing here. On her drive back to return the metal detector to the hardware store, she decides if she's gonna get anywhere, she needs to think like Jeremy, which isn't easy considering Jeremy thought that the government was controlling the minds of children through subliminal breakfast cereal commercials. Anyway, Jeremy was big into research, so Frankie plans on learning as much as she can about the carousel. She remembered from school that the town's welcome center has a room dedicated to the carousel, so she makes that her next stop. The woman at the town center shows her the room, and right off the bat, there's a giant carousel stag near the front of the room with a pretty creepy look, especially after the haunting nightmare Frankie had in the opening of this comic. Apparently, this wasn't one of the animals you could ride on, but instead sat at the very top of the carousel as a decoration. It's actually the only intact piece of the original attraction. The carousel was more impressive than we thought. Built in the late 1800s, it had 3 stories and the roof was made of glass so the riders could watch the stars at night. Frankie asks if the carousel was so great, why was it torn down, but I guess there are no actual records as to why. She then spends some time taking pictures of everything in the room, hoping somewhere there's a clue that will lead back to Jeremy. The woman at the front desk does mention that a young man came in a few months ago researching the carousel as well. It's dark out now, and Frankie drives back out to the field where the carousel stood. Then, in the distance, she sees some black figures standing in the field, but they're hard to make out. She turns on her brights to get a better look and finds it to be a herd of deer, dozens of them, and their eyes are glowing white watching her. The strange glow of their their eyes is unsettling to say the least, and in a panic, Frankie drives back to her apartment. She immediately slams down a glass jar, throws some change in, and writes moving fund on it. She says to the cat, "When this jar is full, we're leaving." And I don't blame her after that frightening scene. That's the end of that chapter, but there's a short episode here called Remember. There's several episodes like this that take place throughout the series and give us insights into the past of the characters. In this Remember segment, Frankie is checking her mail and complains about the pile of packages by the door, suspecting the postal service was lazy and just dropped everything in the corner for residents to sort out. Jeremy shows up and she asks him how the UFO hunt is going. He seems kind of embarrassed and says he gave up on that months ago. Then he spots the pile of packages and reveals that these are all his. After struggling to carry them all, Frankie insists to let her help, and they head up to his apartment door. It's clear Frankie is a bit more organized than Jeremy. Her stack of packages is neatly stacked, and his is a complete mess. She drops her stack in front of his door and says goodbye, but Jeremy stops her and tries to ask her something, awkwardly fumbling the words until finally just saying never mind. I wonder what he was going to ask. Was it about the strange phenomenon in Stagtown, or was he just going to try and ask her out? After that glimpse of the past, we jump back to the present. Some unseen person is sitting at their computer when they get an email. We can see that it's from Jeremy, and the receiver is someone named Felix, who seems really worried. Next, it seems we're looking into the future, as the word soon appears on the page, along with some really eerie text. It reads, "I don't know how long we've been here, but I can hear music." There's a spooky shot of a carousel, only instead of stags, there are horses. The text continues, saying, "Even after all this time, can you hear it?" Vaguely appearing through some dark mist is deer with hollowed out black eyes. Continuing on, it reads, "We're almost all together. Nothing gets out. You hear it, don't you? We knew you were one of us." Then we see a beautifully twisted illustration of a disfigured doe, its skin branching out like antlers, and below it a stag covered in massive flies, blood ripping from its eyes, and spiders crawling on its face. It's easily one of the most disturbing images so far. Chapter 4, Under. This may be my favorite chapter so far, just because of how well it displays a very specific type of fear. Frankie is putting her organizational skills to work and has spent days trying to sort through Jeremy's notes. It hasn't gotten her too far. She hasn't had any luck deciphering the code in the journal, but she finally finds a sketch that seems recognizable. An old bridge that had closed down years ago. Finally finding a lead, Frankie heads over to the broken down bridge to search around. She reluctantly gets out of her car to check it out, and we're greeted with another cool chapter page, with the title made up from cracks in the ground. Well, other than some dead birds, there's not much to go on the bridge. She reaches the end and stumbles upon a small footpath leading into the woods. After hesitating for a moment, she walks down the path, declaring that she'll probably regret this. After a bit of a hike, she finds a dilapidated old farmhouse. It seems ancient. Frankie's starting to suspect that this whole thing is a ruse to get her to learn town history, but she says she refuses to learn anything from this situation. Walking around the building, she finds all the entrances are bricked up and sealed off. Finally, she does find a window that's broken in. Inside, nature has really taken over the place, and there's plant life everywhere. Frankie leaves for now and comes back the next day fully prepared. She says she wasn't about to waltz into some mystery building without some essentials. She's got water, snacks, bandages, a knife, a flashlight, headlamp, battery, charger, and some rope. Okay, maybe she overdid it, but like I said before, I love that she's going against the horror trope, and instead of just going in when she first found the building, she went back and did some heavy prep work. I love it. She climbs inside and makes her way through the overgrowth until she finds a little clearing, at the center of which is a trapdoor. It must have been Jeremy who cleared the brush around it, and Frankie says it's hard to picture him doing anything in the woods other than maybe looking for Bigfoot. She opens the trapdoor and finds a ladder leading down into darkness. Well, if Jeremy went down there and came out fine, it should be alright. She can't imagine him having any survival skills after all. She plans on climbing the ladder down halfway to get a look at what's down there, and if it seems safe, she'll go get some gear like a lantern and come back tomorrow to explore it. She also posts a tweet about her location in case she gets hurt, that way people will know where to look. Then she ties a rope to a nearby tree and brings it with her. Wow, she's really doing everything pretty smart here. She makes her way down the ladder, but at about halfway down, one of the rungs breaks beneath her foot and the ladder snaps in half. She starts to fall backwards, but grabs the rope, which immediately snaps. The trapdoor shuts above her and she falls to the ground below. Luckily, Frankie is okay, just some bumps and bruises, and she lights up her headlamp. After shouting for a while, it's clear that no one's gonna hear her down here, and on top of that, she has no cell service. There's no way back up the opening, and she finds herself in a square and empty room underground. The only exit being a small square vent opening on the wall. She did bring food that she could ration out and survive maybe 3 days with, which is a plus. After a while waiting around checking her reception, she finally decides to power her phone down to save battery. Eventually, she decides she's gotta see where the vent leads, but before she crawls through, she ties a thread to a nail just outside so that if there are any twists and turns, she can follow it back. Clever. Crawling through the vent isn't easy and pretty tiring, and there seems to be no end to it. The only good thing is that there are no turns, just one long straight tunnel. After who knows how long, Frankie gives up and turns around, slowly respooling the thread as she crawls back. Shortly after changing directions, however, she finds that the thread line is already tight. She looks up to find that the nail is in the vent just a few feet behind her, and that the way she came in is completely shut up. That's right, guys, the claustrophobia is about to get very real. At this point, it's clear that there is a supernatural force in Stagtown. With no other option, she continues down the tunnel the direction she started toward. She continues to check her phone every so often, but has to stop eventually because her battery is near dead. As time goes on, the vent feels as if it's closing in on her, and she begins to feel sick to her stomach. She stops to rest here and there and uses the spare battery she brought to keep her phone and headlamp charged. But in the end, that runs out too. She has no idea how long she's been in the tunnel and has to stop to rest several times. Well, as much rest as you can get in a pitch black tunnel underground. It just keeps going, and at this point her body is in aching pain from crawling so long. She feels like whatever the supernatural force is that's doing this wants her to give up. She can hear faint voices in the darkness somewhere in front of her and behind her as well. It finally becomes completely overwhelming, and Frankie freaks out in a panic, crying for help. There's an amazing page here showing the surface leading underground where Frankie is trapped, her screams echoing through the vents. The author does a stunning job here of showcasing the terror of this situation. I do have to say, the idea of being trapped in a tight space like this is horrifying, and I find myself subconsciously holding my breath while reading this chapter. I hate it, but in the best way. After screaming her lungs out, Frankie breaks down into tears, and we see blood dripping from her battered hands. She gets some band-aids out of her bag and patches them up, then continues forward, convincing herself she just has to keep going. With her headlamp out, she crawls forward in agony in the dark until finally she hits a wall. The vent has finally come to an end and it's blocked off. Like some kind of sick joke. She reaches at the wall and scratches at it. Unlike the solid walls of the vent, this one is actually made of dirt. She starts digging through it, and after a while, some light bleeds through. Finally, an exit. She furiously claws through the dirt and emerges on the other side, collapsing, only to find the nail with the thread right in front of her eyes. She looks up to see on the opposite wall the tunnel that she entered. She's emerged from the other side of the room that she started in. After all that time and suffering, she's gotten nowhere. Frankie just stays laying on the ground in tears. She's hungry, thirsty, tired, and the room is dark. This chapter is absolutely unforgiving. She's finally just completely given up. Clearly no one's coming to find her, and she's out of options. Despite her headlamp being dead, she suddenly finds a small illumination in the room. She looks up and sees a glow by the dirt wall that she climbed through. There's a small object that must have been embedded in the wall, a flying saucer keychain that lights up. Frankie instantly recognizes it as Jeremy's keychain. This reminds her that he was here and that he somehow escaped. She tries once again to think like Jeremy would, and if he were here, she thinks he would look for a secret passage. So Frankie begins investigating every inch of the walls in the room, but she finds nothing, leaving her only one more place to look: the vent. She really doesn't want to go back in there, but she doesn't want to die either. She crawls back into the vent, this time knocking on every panel as she does so. Floor, ceiling, wall. I actually really like the illustration here, showing the knocks on each side of the square text. I don't know why, but I find it very satisfying, the sound effects next to each wall that she's knocking on. Anyway, this repeats down the tunnel until finally we hear 3 knocks and a thud. This time, one of the walls sounds hollow. She presses into it, and sure enough, it opens. A secret passage. Frankie bursts into tears and laughter as she spots a marking on the wall, an arrow pointing in, and a J. So this is how Jeremy escaped. Even so, Frankie feels like she's trading one trap for another. This tunnel is through pure dirt and is way more cramped than the vent. I just caught myself holding my breath again. Frankie can't help but think of Jeremy down here before her, crawling through the dirt in the dark. The weird guy she never spent more than 5 minutes talking to. He must have been so lonely, and now he's gone. Frankie then finds an opening and emerges into a small room. At the center is a carousel pole covered in roses and piercing through the skull of a stag on top. She touches one of the flowers and it instantly turns to dust in her hand. At the base of the pole is a strange black liquid, like tar or something. She looks at the ceiling and spots what could be another opening. She even finds footholds dug into the wall leading to it. This must have been Jeremy's doing when he escaped. Frankie's starting to think that she never gave the guy enough credit. She climbs the wall with her remaining strength through some spider webs and presses her hand against the ceiling at the top. There is a secret opening and she climbs out onto the surface and into the grass. She rolls onto her back and laughs, looking up at the blue sky, appreciating it now more than ever. The chapter ends with her saying once again, "It's time to leave this town right now." Man, it is so satisfying after most of this chapter taking place in the dark for Frankie to pop out into those bright colors. The green grass and the blue sky. It really conveys the feeling of escape from the underground so well. I felt like I was taking a deep breath right along with her, which is why this is one of my favorite chapters of any comic I've read lately. Well, that's where I'm going to end it today. Like I said, if you want me to continue covering this series, let me know in the comments and I'll finish it up. Go support the author Punko over on Webtoons. They actually have a great companion comic called Stagtoons where you get some behind the scenes on the series in a comical way. Like how originally Punko submitted Stagtown as part of a 3-month comic contest, but only learned about it near the end of the 3 months. So she did the whole thing in 10 days with barely any sleep. Pretty cool. Also, the mystery in Stagtown goes very deep. There's actually an ARG associated with the comic, and if you look back on various pages, you'll find numbers, symbols, and hidden messages. Not to mention that the website on Jeremy's computer is real and you can visit it right now. There's actually a whole Discord surrounding this ARG. I haven't dived into it myself, so I don't know if it's still ongoing or not, but I'm excited to check it out. Shout out to Kill Me Katie as always for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now, and if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me with a social media handle or name at the address below. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.
I can't reach his ghastly impressions. Nothing but forgetting illusion. I can't reach his ghastly impressions.
In a world full of ravenous zombies, rabid animals, it's hard to find a moment of refuge, let alone a permanent safe haven. After their terrifying run-in with the cat lady, Elsie and the gang may have found just that. Pet City, an animal superstore full of all the food, toys, and soft beds they could ever want. They may have found more than they bargained for, however, when they discovered that Pet City already has inhabitants, and there's something not quite right here. Many of the cats are pregnant, but there are no kittens around. The wet food tastes a little funny, and the meal prep room is off limits and guarded. Is this finally a place to call home, or is something sinister going on behind that door? This is a story that does not let up and only gets more disturbing as it goes. This is Feral. Hello friends, this is Grief speaking, and today I'm covering more Feral, the disturbing cat-focused horror comic from the creator of Stray Dogs and featuring the same unassuming art style. If you happen to miss part 1 and 2, you can check them out in the links below, but this is actually a good place for new readers to start as it's a fresh arc and the story and characters are easy to get into here. These are actually the most recently released issues of Feral, so this will be my last video covering the series for a little while at least. Big shout out to the writer and artists of Feral, Tony Fleeks, Trish Forstner, and Tone Rodriguez. They are phenomenal creative people, and you can support them by picking up the recently released paperback copy of Feral 9 Lives at your local comic book shop or bookstore. And finally, if you like what I do here on the main channel, consider checking out my second channel, Grief Speaks. I just uploaded an office tour video where I go through my bookshelf backdrop and some of the weird things I've collected over the years. I'll put a link below, but we have a lot to get to today, so without further ado, this is Feral 9 Lives Explained. Chapter 11. This issue starts right where we left off, the cat lady's car upside down and smashed. We can even see the old woman's body smeared across the pavement on the driver's side, and several rabid animals moving in on the crash site. Elsie cries out for the others and quickly finds Gigi, who is not in great shape. She's missing an eye and has a gnarly cut across her face. Luckily, the 3 kittens are okay, although they're understandably freaked out by their mother's face. Shortly after, they find Lord and Chloe as well in one of the broken crates. They start to make a plan when one of the kittens, Ash, says that there's bad kind outside, and we can see a zombie raccoon and fox peeking through the windshield. Although this is not what caught her attention. She says there's big bad kind. The other infected animals go running, and behind them approaches a hulking monstrosity, an infected grizzly bear that's bigger than the car. It's frightening to say the least. Before they can get a plan of escape together, the bear starts clawing at the car, trying to get in at them. As the beast continues to strike the car, it inadvertently pushes it off the edge of the cliff, sending the frightened cats falling to the forest below. There's a great panel here as they flail in the air, looking through the broken back window of the car to see the menacing figure of the bear watching them fall. They crash to the ground, this time right side up, and surprisingly it seems like everyone is still okay. Thank God for the nimbleness of cats. They do a quick head count and weirdly find another cat in the car, a blue cat named Ghost that doesn't speak. Chloe and Lord recognize him from the cat house, and I guess he was in the back of one of the crates, but in the craziness they didn't notice him. We learn that the reason he doesn't speak is that he was born deaf. An interesting note on Ghost is that he was originally supposed to show up in the cat lady arc, and you can even see him on the last page of chapter 7. Anyway, Lord spots none other than Patch standing nearby outside of the car. He calls out to him and Patch turns his head. At this point he's looking worse than ever, almost like a demonic cat creature or something. The ever so naive Lord runs up to him and doesn't understand why he's not responding. Elsie tries to warn him and tears well up in Lord's eyes when he sees how bad Patch looks. Sadly, Patch doesn't even attack, but stares at them for a moment. He is honestly one of the most tragic parts of this whole comic. Just then, the massive bear lets out a bone-rattling roar and starts making his way down the cliffside. They need to run, but Lord tries in vain to snap Patch out of it. The bear closes in and Patch turns to look at it, baring his teeth. This badass zombie cat is going to try and fight the beast, maybe subconsciously to defend his friends. Gigi is done waiting on Elsie and Lord and tells her kids to climb the trees and run. Finally, Patch lunges at the bear, clawing his face up. Here you can see just how big the size difference is, as Patch's entire body can fit on the bear's face. Lord just can't leave Patch behind and keeps trying to get him to come with them. Meanwhile, Patch is doing his damnedest, taking chunks out of the bear wherever he can. Finally, Lord comes to grips with the situation, and him and Elsie run away with tears in their eyes. Behind them, the great bear finally gets his paws on Patch, bringing him up into the air, and with a sickening crunch, slamming him to the ground. Well, rest in peace, Patch. At the end of the day, he went out pretty valiantly, considering he was a bad kind, sacrificing himself for his friends. Elsie and Lord spot the other cats up in the trees, but before they make it there themselves, a big-ass Rottweiler comes barking out of nowhere and chasing them. Elsie starts climbing the tree, but Lord doesn't quite make it, and turns around to face the dog, hissing at him. It seems like this could be the end, but a voice calls out from nearby, immediately stopping the dog and calling him away. Here we're introduced to an orange tabby cat named Lucky, and it looks like the dog is his friend Mush. Chapter 12. With the sounds of barks echoing behind them, we see the 3 kittens running for their lives. The Rottweiler is chasing them through the woods. Ghost jumps in ready to defend them, and then we see the truth. The kittens are just playing with the big dog, and it's actually adorable. Gigi warns them not to play too rough with Mush and apologizes to Lucky for them being so rowdy. Lucky says it's fine, and more importantly asks Gigi how she's doing. She admits she can't even feel the injured side of her face. She asks Lucky how he can speak to Mush, and he explains that he raised the dog since he was a puppy. They look out onto the nearby town, and here we see Pet City, a superstore surrounded by rabbit cats and dogs. Lucky tells her there's beds, toys, treats, and most importantly, plenty of food. Best of all, if they could get inside, they'd have it all to themselves and be away from the bad kind. Lord overhears the conversation and asks how they would even get close to the place with all the infected around. Here, Lucky introduces himself properly to Lord. He's a bigger cat and comes off pretty intimidating. He tells them that if they they work together, they'll think of a way. He then asks them about Elsie, who's sitting up in a nearby tree by herself. Chloe says they should leave her alone. She's processing a lot of trauma. But Gigi says that what she's really processing is guilt. She goes even further, saying they should leave her and her bad instincts behind. She points at her missing eye as an example of Elsie's bad decision making, but in the middle of a rant realizes she doesn't hear her kittens. Lucky calls out to Mush and we hear the dog bark back, apparently signaling that they're all okay. Gigi doesn't know why, but can't help but trust Lucky. In the woods, we see Ghost, Mush, and the kittens playing, and emerging from the bushes nearby, some rabid animals watch them. Mush picks up on their scent, but at this point the animals are ready to feast, and there are at least 5 of them. Back with the other cats, Lucky says he's studied Pet City for a while, and nobody ever comes in or out. The doors never open. If a cat could get in there, they would have it all to themselves. Problem is, it's surrounded by creepers, the walls are smooth and unclimbable, and there aren't any windows or crawl spaces low to the ground. Chloe mentions that the cat lady would have been able to get them in there. She used to take them there all the time. She then repeats the cult-like phrase, "The lady keeps us." Gigi points out the fact that the lady is dead. She almost killed them crashing her car and is currently smeared across the pavement up on the road. But I guess Chloe isn't as crazy as she seems and says that she just means that a lady could get them in there. Maybe not the cat lady, but some other human. Gigi says they can't trust people anymore and need to take care of themselves. She then rattles off a list of things people did to them, chasing them out of their homes, shooting at them, killing some of them, and trapping them in cages. However, Chloe thinks that it's nice to be cared for, and the lady did care for them. Gigi is pissed at Chloe's defense of the cat lady and starts screaming at her that the lady threw her kittens down the stairs. Although, if you really remember, it was technically Gigi's fault because she cut the cat lady's ankle, which sent her falling down the stairs. Either way, Chloe says that's because the kittens were being bad, and Gigi almost loses it. Meanwhile, in the deeper woods, the rabid animals move in on the kittens, but Mush stops an infected fox in its tracks by biting its neck and ripping its freaking head off. As the blood falls, the kittens are all smiles, impressed by their new friend. The other bad kind are less quick to attack now, but before we see what happens, it cuts back to the others. Lord climbs up to talk to Elsie, telling her how tense it's getting between the others. She's quiet, but Lord continues the conversation alone, telling her how much he misses Patch and thinks about how much he must have suffered these past few weeks. With tears in her eyes, Elsie finally speaks, saying she should have listened to Patch at the beginning and stayed put by the truck after they first crashed. Maybe if they stayed, Patch wouldn't have gotten sick and none of this would have happened. She's just sick of always running and constantly being in crisis mode, missing the days when they were home with people and she could just be safe and alone. She sympathizes with Lord and Chloe. It must have been nice to feel safe and cared for while it lasted. Lord says that whatever it is they're looking for, they're not going to find it by sitting around watching the birds. Down below, Mush, Ghost, and the kittens come back, and they're covered in blood. Gigi freaks out at the sight of her blood-soaked babies, but they say it's okay. It's not their blood anyway. They start to explain everything that happened, and at the same time, Elsie watches the roof of Pet City where she notices an opening. After looking at the nearby power lines, she gets an idea. She leaps down to the others and tells them that she knows how they're gonna get inside. Chapter 13. This issue starts off with Gigi freaking the hell out and proclaiming that they're all gonna die. She believes that they all have the infection and are eventually gonna turn. She can't handle the anxiety of waiting for her and her kittens to become bad kind. Elsie thinks that Gigi is only acting this way because Elsie was the one who came up with the idea, but it seems that Gigi is genuinely terrified. Lucky tells her it's all cool, no one is bitten, but she thinks that the kittens have gotten it just from the blood on them. They've even licked some of it while cleaning themselves, and she reminds them that they also ate some of the cat lady, and then she runs away in a panic. Lucky just looks back at the others like, "You guys ate a lady?" Chloe's quick to say she never did, and Lord explains the situation they were in. Lucky catches up with Gigi and tries to calm her down, telling her it's fine. He doesn't think you can catch the virus that way. He has good evidence to support it since Mush eats the bad kind all the time and is perfectly fine. We can actually see him chowing down on one as they speak. Lucky says he would eat anything he can get his hands on out here to survive, and realizes that Gigi is a survivor too, considering she ate a lady, which he says is hardcore. Gigi is visibly visibly calmed by his words. It's clear that Lucky has an incredibly charming demeanor and has at least a 15 in charisma on his character sheet. They head back to the others and Elsie breaks down her plan. She says there's a way in on the roof and believes that they could access it if they climbed one of the telephone poles and crossed the wires hanging above. The others are still skeptical. It's pretty high up and unlike the trees, there's no grass to fall on below, but instead hard concrete. Lord asks, what about the bad kind everywhere? It's a good question, and to be honest, Elsie is actually worried about what they may find inside, but Lucky assures her that it's safe, making the point that these brain-dead droolers aren't cooking up any plans to get inside. Either way, they need to figure out how to get past the ones that are outside. Gigi wonders if the kittens are actually going to be able to make the climb, and so they plan on carrying them. Elsie, Gigi, and Lucky will all take one. Another issue is Lord. Since he's been declawed, climbing is going to be difficult, but with Chloe helping him, he thinks he can do it. Gigi interrupts the plan again, complaining about how dangerous this is, saying every time they do anything, it goes wrong. Honestly, I'm getting kind of sick of her attitude. Well, Lucky says it's going to be different this time because they have him. You can see Lord roll his eyes like, who is this guy? They're also worried about Ghost. He can't hear, so how will he know what to do, and what if it impairs his balance? Hopefully he'll be able to follow their lead. Elsie's still wearing the cone that the cat lady put on her, and Lucky uses his claw to cut it off. It's clear that along with Gigi, Elsie is quite smitten with this tabby cat as well, saying, how did they ever get so lucky? Gross. So the plan goes into effect. They decide to use Mush as a decoy for the bad kind, since they're actually afraid of the big dog. While he distracts them, the rest of the crew makes their way to the pole. They all manage to climb it, including Lord, who has the most difficult time. They all make it to the top of the pole and begin to cross the wire. Funny enough, Ghost, who they were worried about, easily makes his way across to the other side. Lord is having a much more difficult time and is having trouble balancing. Things get worse when a storm comes overhead and it begins to rain. He cowers on the wire and cries out for Elsie's help. Below, the bad kind are all looking up at them, waiting to feast on anyone who falls. And with the wire now wet, Lord slips off. Elsie reaches out and grabs him just in time, and Gigi is pissed, asking where her kitten Eleanor is. With her focus on Lord, the little kitten was left on the wire alone and starts making her way across to her mom. Lord manages to climb back up and they all move forward. Although Eleanor is moving pretty quickly, happy to prove to her mom that she can do it herself. Gigi, Lucky, and the other two kittens have made it across now. Unfortunately, Eleanor's quick movements are shaking the wire, and at the same time, lightning strikes nearby, sending Elsie falling to her doom. At this point, she was just close enough to the building that Gigi is able to grab her with her claws and pull her up. Elsie is so relieved she begins rambling off apologies and thanking Gigi for saving her life, but Gigi just ignores her and moves forward to check on her kids. The tension between these cats is getting thick. I guess you could say they're acting catty. They all make their way down through the open Pet City skylight and onto some high shelves below. They are immediately greeted with tons of food, treats, and toys. It seems like Lucky was right, and this is the paradise they were hoping for. They start making a plan to gather up some food and blankets to get warm, and Lucky starts to look around for a way to get Mush inside. However, they're all interrupted at the sight of several cats. They don't look like they're infected, but they have a sinister look either way, and their eyes are green. Elsie asks them how they got here. Did they also come through the roof? One of the cats, presumably the leader, responds that they have always been here. And that wraps up chapter 13. On to chapter 14. The cat speaking to the gang is named Nico, and he seems like an authority figure of sorts. He refers to outside of Pet City as the out there, like it's space or something, and calls Elsie and the crew outsiders. He wonders how they descended from the sky like birds. Lucky asks who these cats are and where they came from, and Nico says they don't come from anywhere. They were born here and they will die here. We learn that Nico refers to himself as the ruler. He literally keeps the rules, but another cat named Mother Helena is really in charge. He even calls her the beginning and the end. He says that everyone has a purpose here and urges the outsiders to follow him. Lord is shocked that they've never been outside. Nico tells him that sometimes cats from the out there would come for cleaning or medicine, but none have come for many closings. The fact that these cats only know life in the store means they refer to night as closing, which I thought was a funny detail. As they walk, the kittens find that some of the Pet City cats are staring at them. them. But Gigi tells them to just keep walking. Nico says that there are lounging areas throughout Pet City, and if they find an empty place, they can keep it. He shows them their gathering place, the cleaning room, where food is prepped, and the medicine room for relaxation. They also keep the litter room far away from everything else so it doesn't smell. This place doesn't sound half bad. He says again that everyone has a purpose here, and those who fulfill their purpose are welcome to everything Pet City has to offer. He points out several cats and details their purpose, like a gatherer, a food bringer, a cleaner, and the discipliners. I should note that many of the cats here are pretty fat, probably due to the fact that they have unlimited food. Nico tells them that soon Mother Helena will give them their purpose as well, once they've shown their value. Lucky cuts in, telling him they need to open the door and let Mush in, but Nico says that this is forbidden. Lucky tells him he's worried about his friends, since there are bad kind all over out there, but Nico doesn't seem to know what he's talking about, which makes sense actually. If they've never left here, why would they know about the rabies outbreak? There's a bit of a commotion when Gigi yells at some of the Pet City cats to back off. For some reason they seem fascinated by the kittens and won't stop staring at them, getting a little too close. They're acting like they've never seen kittens before, and one of them says, "We haven't seen any like this." What the hell is that supposed to mean? Gigi says of course they have, and points out that half the cats in here seem pregnant. Lucky gets her to calm down, and Nico tells them to get some rest before feeding time. They'll want to be at their best for Mother Helena. Elsie and the gang regroup a bit, and she doesn't really know how to feel about this place. After the cat lady's house, she's extra suspicious of weird ass cats. Gigi says it does feel weird, but they haven't found anywhere else as secure and stocked. She says that if Elsie is really worried about it being like the cat lady's house, then she shouldn't open any doors, referring of course to Elsie letting loose the bad kind at the lady's house, which caused a massacre. Lucky tells them both to just be cool. They can see where this all goes, and in the meantime relax. Lord is just hyped to explore the place and check out all the toys. The kittens want to go as well, but Gigi's worried. However, Lucky convinces her they'll be fine and to let him go with Lord. As the other cats start to leave, Lucky takes Gigi into a nearby room. She still doesn't understand how he has the ability to make her feel calm, and before you know it, they start making out. It's kind of funny seeing cats kiss like humans. Outside the room, the other cats hear some weird ass purring noises coming from inside, and Lord tells the kids to come with him and Chloe to explore. Elsie starts telling Lord maybe they should try to get a better handle on the place first, and he cuts her off, telling her not to tell him what to do. Later, everyone meets up for dinner. The cats all sit in a big circle with piles of food in front of them, and there are several spots left for Elsie's gang. They have a mixture of wet and dry food, although the wet food is not looking very appetizing. Elsie is shocked and wonders how they managed to get the cans open. Eleanor moves in to take a bite, but Nico tells them to stop. No one eats before Mother Helena. Speaking of which, a huge cat comes walking out, followed by a ton of fresh baby kittens. She eats some of her food and then plops onto her side, allowing the kittens to drink from her. Nico points out Elsie and the others to Mother Helena, but she just ignores him and instead asks about the food, saying that the balance isn't quite right. Lord agrees and says that the wet food is gross, suggesting maybe it's gone bad. He says he's gonna grab some kibble without the wet food, and typical Lord just starts walking to the meal prep room without asking anybody. Nico yells at him to stop, saying this is not his purpose. A big gray cat walks out and tells Lord to just wait, and that the meal prepper, Axel, will prepare a new serving for him. Lord says it's no big deal, he can just eat from the source, and tries to walk in again. Nico then calls the discipliners, who quickly surround Lord. Nico tells him he was warned twice and that there is no third warning. Any cat that stands alone outside of purpose will be subject to swift and final discipline. He asks Lord if he stands alone, and the others if any cat will stand with him. Obviously, Lord is really confused. What does he mean final discipline? Lucky then speaks up, saying he will stand with Lord. It seems that two cats standing together can spare someone from a final discipline, but this still has consequences. Nico says that Lucky and Lord will not be allowed food for 2 closings. Lord is pissed off, exclaiming how it's not fair, and walks away. Elsie thanks Lucky for looking out for Lord and feels like she should have been the one to do it. Lucky seems a little annoyed and tells her that she needs to get him under control fast or he's gonna blow this whole thing for them. So Elsie catches up to Lord to talk with him. She tells him he needs to take it easy. This could finally be a permanent home for them that's safe, and they can't afford to make these cats angry. She just blatantly tells him not to screw this up for them. He's baffled she would say this. He had a permanent home before she dragged him into the woods and threw him away, and when he found another permanent home where crazy old lady took care of him, she showed up and in less than a week turned the place into a massacre. He says he's not the screw up here, Elsie is. Everybody loves having him around. She's the one who's gonna mess it all up because it's what she always does. God damn, those are some harsh words. He walks away and leaves Elsie speechless. Lucky shows up and tells her she needs to stay alert. She feels bad that he's banned from eating, but he shrugs it off, saying he'll just grab some food off one of the shelves after he figures out a way to get mush inside. Elsie says that the rule maker made it clear that he can't have food for 2 days, but Lucky doesn't seem to care, pointing out that Nico also said he's got to leave his friend outside in the rain with monsters. He thinks that Elsie's got it all wrong. They need to quit acting like these cats are wise old kings. In reality, they're creepy shut-ins. He didn't almost die getting in here just to have these fat losers tell him what to do. They don't know how to hunt or be hungry, and they wouldn't last a second outside with the creepers. They just need to make the Pet City cats think they're in charge. Say whatever they need to hear to keep them on their ass, and the minute an opportunity arises, the second you see what you want, you take it. Doing just that, Lucky kisses Elsie as the rabid cats watch from outside the glass doors. Wow, Lucky is a literal tomcat. And this love triangle cannot have good results. Chapter 15. On a clear morning outside Pet City, the wild rabbit animals continue to roam, and Mush is still doing alright for himself. He pounces on a small dog and tears it to pieces, scaring the hell out of the other critters nearby. Inside, Lord watches through the window, actually jealous of Mush since he hasn't eaten due to his discipline by Nico. Elsewhere, Lucky and Elsie are cozied up after a night of nookie, I guess. Suddenly, a crazy sound rings out, and we see a Pet City cat with tears in her eyes screaming out in pain. Elsie freaks for a moment, assuming that the bad kind got in somehow, but Lucky tells her it's clearly someone giving birth, and if she plays her cards right, that could be them one day. That's creepy. Elsie sends Lucky on his way and tells him to be sneaky about it. Clearly they don't want Gigi finding out. Of course, Lucky, that sly son of a bitch, actually seeks Gigi out and pretends he couldn't find her and then starts flirting with her. The three kittens are looking at the store fish tanks and are trying to spot a fish, but they find they are completely devoid of aquatic life. They wonder what happened when Nico and some of the other cats roll up saying that they ate the fish. Nico says that when the humans abandoned the store, they left piles of food for the animals, but the fish were the first to starve, so they ate them, followed by the birds. A creepy cat comes up right behind the kittens, drooling, saying next they ate the... but he's cut off before we learn what. Gigi shows up and tells the cats to back up once again, and the cat says that they've never seen kittens this big before. What does that even mean? Nico tries to apologize on the cat's behalf, and then Lord shows up complaining that he's starving. He begs Nico to let him eat since it's been 2 days, but Nico says that Lord must wait to eat at dinner. Lord does not like that answer and keeps saying he's hungry, begging for just a small treat. He says he's dying and he can feel his stomach ache and his head hurts. Due to his whining, Nico increases Lord's punishment to 3 closings. Elsie butts in and defends Lord, saying that Nico's rules are arbitrary and they don't take into account situation or circumstance and what they've been through. Lucky hears the commotion and comes in, trying to get Elsie to back down. She then throws him under the bus a little and mentions how he said that these cats are all creepy shut-ins, but Lucky denies saying it. Nico says that due to her insolence, she will not be allowed a meal for 1 closing. This just makes Elsie more defiant, daring him to increase it to 3 days, but Nico only warns her to lower her voice as there are mothers sleeping and tells her there are punishments far more severe than withholding meals. At this point, a crowd of cats has formed around to listen. Elsie starts to leave when someone in the crowd slaps her hard. She just runs away, and Lucky asks the cats which one of them did it. No one fesses up, and Lucky says he's trying to follow the rules, but if they want to get violent, then he can get violent. Meanwhile, Lord's stomach is making unholy noises from hunger, and he sneaks off toward the meal prep area, hoping maybe he can sneak some food. As he makes way toward the doors, a Pet City cat gets his attention from behind a shelf. She says that this place is not safe, especially for outsiders. Although it seems like everything is structured here, Pet City did not come to order peacefully, and that they all have blood on their hands. Lord asks her why she's telling him all this, and she says it's because she still dreams of freedom. But the cats in charge here don't believe in freedom. People used to come here, and sometimes they would rescue cats into the out there. She believes if she keeps her head down, one day people may come again, and she'll have her chance at freedom. But Lord and the other outsiders are not safe because they're not able to follow the rules. She tells him that there is a way out through the front door, but he must find a switch. The large gray cat from before steps out of the meal prep room again and starts questioning the cat, asking what she told Lord. Lord is too hungry to ponder what the cat told him, and with the large cat out of the way, this may be a good chance to sneak into the room. He slowly opens the doors and finds a cat, presumably Axel, covered in blood and ripping something apart apart on the floor. Elsewhere, Lucky finds Elsie hiding near the registers crying. She says she hates it here. They finally found a place where she can be alone and there's still no peace. Lucky says this is just the consequence of being part of something. Relationships, family, everyone you get close to can mess you up. He tells her to just let the other cats fend for themselves every once in a while. They're grown-ups after all. He says she needs to put some distance between herself and the other cats, especially Lord, who's a troublemaker. He believes she's stronger than all of them. He moves in on her, biting her neck, and she purrs at the sensation. Wow, who knew these cats would get so horny? The moment is interrupted, however, by none other than Gigi, who's caught them in the act. Lucky tries to convince her that she was just seeing things, but she isn't buying it and gets in Elsie's face. She screams at her, saying she ruins everything and tells her to stay away from her kids. Elsie says that she practically raised the kittens with Gigi, and this sets Gigi off. She slashes Elsie across the face, leaving bloody scratch marks. It is a full-on cat fight, literally. Gigi shows her fangs and hisses and then goes in for another attack, slashing Elsie again. Finally, Elsie starts to fight back and claws at Gigi. The fight is soon interrupted by Lord, who rushes over telling them they need to run and that the Pet City cats are eating babies. Wait, what? Lucky says he must be delirious from hunger, but Nico confirms it himself, saying that they do in fact eat their young. The large cat from earlier is there as well and adds that they eat rule breakers too. He drops the corpse of the cat that spoke to Lord before. Her throat is chewed out. And that is the end of chapter 15 and the 9 Lives arc of Feral. These damn cats can't get a break. So it seems the wet food they've been serving is actually the fresh corpses of the dead. And even more disturbing, it seems that this is primarily made up of small kittens. The reason so many of the female cats in Pet City are pregnant is because they are straight up breeding their meals. Conceptually, it may be the most disturbing thing we've seen so far. Well, I hate to say it, but this is the most recent issue of Feral. We're all caught up, so this is going to be my last video for now while we wait for the next arc to release. What do you guys think will happen next? Let me know in the comments. Shout out to Kill Me Katie as always for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now. And if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me a submission to the address below with the name or social media handle. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grease speaking. Goodbye, friends.
You win some, you lose some, and no one can tell you why. So you go home again. You lick your wounds and say goodbye. You know you've messed things up this time, so you go home.